Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto was one of the Jedi. At the start of their trip, Naruto and Jiraiya find themselves pulled into the future by an unknown force. With no way back home, and no idea what's going on, what will they do? Join the Jedi, naturally. But there are other, more sinister forces after them as well. With the Force to wield and a new group of friends, can Naruto change the future of a galaxy threatened by darkness? Welcome aboard! Chapter 9. Naruto, you're sure you can't just carry us out of here? Ahsoka asked. I mean, you can walk on walls. Ahsoka, we fell over a dozen kilometers, and not all in a straight line, Naruto said. I don't know where we are, and half the holes Gamma Hero made collapsed behind us. Those walls are unstable, and my chakra control still isn't the greatest. I can't make that climb while carrying you and the cat. Ahsoka sighed, but nodded. She had been expecting something like that, but it didn't exactly make her feel any better. Speaking of the cat, Ahsoka, are you gonna carry that thing this whole time? Naruto asked, glaring at the Lothcat on Ahsoka's back. She had fashioned a sort of sling out of her outer robe to carry the thing in. Well, yeah, she said, as if it should have been obvious. His leg is still hurt, and we can't just abandon him down here. He'll die. Naruto privately considered that this wouldn't be a bad thing, but he wisely said nothing. We should give him a name, Ahsoka continued. We can't just keep calling him the cat all the time. Naruto grimaced at the idea, but didn't argue. He knew Ahsoka well enough to know that it hadn't really been a suggestion, more of a polite statement of how things were going to be. Looking at the black-furred demon, his mind flashed back to another cat he had known, one that had also taken pleasure in inflicting pain and misery upon him. Tora, he said with finality. We'll call him Tora. Ahsoka smiled brightly at him, pleased he hadn't tried to argue with her, before resuming her trek across the trash-covered ground. They had been wandering for nearly 30 minutes now, looking for anything useful in the detritus. Ahsoka had figured that there must be a comm unit, an old service droid, maybe even an old speeder somewhere around in the trash piles. Anything they could fix and use to escape, or to signal for help. Naruto, meanwhile, was growing increasingly antsy. Out in the darkness he could hear something following them. A lot of somethings, in fact. He suspected that Gamma Hero had scared them off at first, but with the fearsome toad long since departed, whatever was stalking them was growing in confidence. Frowning, he moved closer to Ahsoka. There's something out there, he said, his voice completely serious for once. They've been following us for a while, and they're getting closer. They'll probably attack us soon. Take this. He held a kunai out for her. It wasn't much, but it was all he had to arm her with. Ahsoka took it from him and gave it a practice twirl, testing the weight. She had learned some knife fighting and combat training at the temple, and Naruto had shown her a bit more. She hadn't expected to have to use those skills quite this soon, however. Where are they coming from? She asked. Her voice was a little higher than normal, but it was steady. She ran through a few Jedi calming exercises to quash her growing nervousness. Naruto pointed to their left, where multiple piles of debris cast eerie shadows in the light from their flashlights. Ahsoka thought she could see faint movement in the darkness, but couldn't be sure. Reaching out with her Force senses though, she could feel a mass of hunger and vicious curiosity moving towards them. Whatever those things were, they definitely weren't friendly. Meanwhile, Naruto's mind was whirling into overdrive. Falling back onto his old lessons, he quickly ran through what he had with him that might be useful. A half-dozen kunai. A single roll of light ninja wire, 4 pranks. His basic medkit, which he always carried with him. And whatever he had in his pockets from yesterday. His eyes lit up as he thought of that last one. Yesterday he'd had a lesson with Jiraiya on sealing. He still had the various practice seals he had scribbled on scrap bits of flimsy stuffed in his pockets. One of them in particular might come in handy right about now. It was meant to be a basic lighting seal, one that emitted a steady glow as it used the chakra it was charged with. Jiraiya had him practice his basic sealing with it because it was unlikely to do anything too horrible if it went wrong. His first few attempts at it, however, did not produce a stable light. Instead, they had used all of the chakra he gave them in a fraction of a second, turning into inadvertent flashbangs. Whatever creatures that were going to attack them lived down here in the gloom. They would likely be very sensitive to light. However, he only had one of the seals with him in a usable form, and no time or supplies to make more. He would have to save it for the right moment. As all of this flashed through his mind, their stalkers had crept close enough that they could hear them skulking in the dark. A sensible plan would probably have been to run away immediately. However, neither Naruto nor Ahsoka had any concept of being intimidated or retreating. Not without a fight. Therefore, with an unspoken agreement, they readied their meager weapons and prepared to meet whatever the darkness had for them head-on. "Here they come," Naruto said, gripping a kunai of his own as he clipped the flashlight to his flak vest. "Get ready." All of a sudden, the shadows were bursting with movement. A dozen large, foul-smelling rodent-like creatures burst out of the dark. They were roughly 3 meters long, with gray, wrinkled skin. They had massive incisor teeth, perfect for tearing into their chosen prey. "Hive rats!" Ahsoka shouted. And, oh sit-spit dash! Right behind the rats was a group of hideous humanoids. They had no eyes, with skin covering where their eyes should have been. They looked diseased, their skin covered in welts and boils. Some wore half-rotted loincloths and carried clubs. Others were more animalistic, running on all fours and snarling. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. With a poof of smoke, 50 clones appeared in front of Naruto. They leapt forward with a wild battle cry, followed by Naruto and Ahsoka. Ahsoka jumped on the back of the nearest hive rat, gagging a bit at the smell. The beast shrieked with rage and bucked wildly, trying to dislodge the sudden weight. She held on with one hand tangled in the rat's sparse hair, while the other hand raised the kunai Naruto had given her. With all of the strength she could muster, she drove the knife into the base of its neck. The hive rat squealed in pain, thrashing from side to side. Its black blood splattered all over Ahsoka's face and chest. She spluttered, spitting some of the nasty-tasting ichor out of her mouth. Again and again, she stabbed the rat in the neck. "Just die already," she grunted. Finally, with a last rattling breath, the hive rat keeled over. Its blood pooled rapidly beneath it, spreading across the ground. Ahsoka hopped off its back, trying to ignore the sensation and the force of the rat dying. She could feel its animal fear and pain, but she pushed them aside as best she could. Naruto still needed her help. The masked boy in question was busily fighting the zombie-like humanoids while his clones butchered the hive rats. The mutated horrors were persistent and fast, he had to give them that. Still, he thought, they weren't very smart, and their twisted bodies made them clumsy and easy to outmaneuver. Ducking under a club swing, he slashed at the nearest one with his kunai, slicing along its belly. The creature screamed in pain and terror as its intestines spilled out of the foot-long gash in its abdomen. Naruto had no time to be disgusted by the gruesome sight, though, as he had to immediately move to the next one. This one tried to tackle him, rushing forward with its arms outstretched. He flipped over the clumsy charge, landing behind it as it slid to a stop. Naruto turned quickly and buried his knife in the back of the thing's head. It twitched once before collapsing bonelessly. Naruto wrenched his kunai out of the fresh corpse and looked around. It didn't look good. More and more of the awful-looking eyeless things were swarming out of the gloom. Their shrieks and snarls filled the air over the shouts of his clones. Cursing under his breath, he created some more clones and charged his attackers. The next few minutes devolved into a blur of noise and movement. Stab, duck, slash, dodge became the only things in his mind. His kunai ran black with the blood of those monsters he had slain. His clothes and hair were matted with dirt and gore. Naruto was grateful for his mask keeping any of the foul mixture from getting in his mouth. Finally, after a dozen hive rats and blind humanoids had fallen to his blade, he was forced to retreat. He flipped back through the air to gain space, landing near where Ahsoka had been. He couldn't immediately see her though. Feeling for Ahsoka's presence with his still underdeveloped force senses, he glanced over to her. He was just in time to see her drive her knife through a hive rat's eye. The beast wailed and writhed in pain. Its thrashing knocked her over before it ran off into the dark to lick its wounds. "Ahsoka," he shouted when he saw her fall. Rushing over to his friend, Naruto was relieved to see that she was unhurt. As she picked herself up, he had an idea. "Ahsoka, force push, on my signal," he yelled. Seeing her nod, he threw his kunai at the horde of beasts being held off by his clones. He sped through the hand signs quickly, praying that this would work. Kunai kage bunshin no jutsu. His kunai multiplied into more than 100, filling the air with sharp metal. Now Ahsoka, he yelled out. Thrusting her hands out in front of her, Ahsoka dug deep. She had always had a strong connection to the Force, and it showed now. With a shout of exertion, she pushed the cloud of deadly knives, accelerating them to blinding speeds. With a wet tearing sound, the Force-assisted kunai slammed into the crowd of hive rats and blind mutants. The knives ripped the foul things to shreds, spraying blood and chunks of flesh and entrails into the air. Piercing shrieks of pain and fear echoed through the murky Undercity, before fading into death rattles. Nice job, Ahsoka, Naruto said, turning to her. That was great. Thanks, she said, panting from the exertion. That was a good idea. Oh, come on. Following her gaze, Naruto turned back around and saw what had prompted her outburst. More of the creatures were now scrambling over the piles of junk. He estimated there were at least twice as many now as in the initial assault. Seeing that, Naruto finally was forced to admit that they were outmatched. It galled him to even think it, but retreat was their only option. Staying where they were meant certain death unless he used the Kyuubi's power, and he wasn't about to even consider doing that. We have to run, he shouted. There's too many of them. When I tell you, shut your eyes. Why? Ahsoka shouted back as she pushed one of the humanoid mutants off of her. Just trust me, Naruto yelled back. Not waiting for an answer, he pulled the defective lighting seal out of his pocket. He wrapped it around a chunk of duracrete he scooped from a nearby pile of rubble and proceeded to pour as much chakra as he could into the seal without it combusting. When it was ready, he chucked it high into the air. Now, close your eyes, he yelled. He shut his own eyes and formed the snake seal. Just as it had yesterday, the flawed seal instantly did its best impersonation of a miniature star. Even through his eyelids the light was still bright, and he could hear the foul creatures around him squealing in sudden agony. The flash lasted only half a second, but it effectively paralyzed the approaching horde of predators. The instant the light faded, Naruto opened his eyes and looked for Ahsoka. He saw her standing a few meters away, blinking spots out of her vision. Come on, let's go, he yelled as he sprinted away from the stunned beasts. Wordlessly agreeing with him, Ahsoka took off as fast as she could. Adrenaline worked its magic in her, as for once she was actually keeping ahead of Naruto. Glancing back, she saw him create another group of clones on the fly, sending them to try and slow the ravenous pack of monsters down as they shook off their pain and surprise. Where are we going? She shouted. I don't know. Away from the things trying to eat us. Gritting her teeth, Ahsoka looked around desperately. If they were going to survive this, they would need something to give them an advantage. As she scanned ahead, she spotted a potential option. Mind racing, she quickly assembled a plan in her head. That tunnel up ahead, she yelled. Can you collapse its ceiling? Maybe, Naruto replied from behind her, immediately guessing her plan. But that could kill us. You got a better idea, she yelled back. It seemed he did not, as he didn't reply. Taking his silence for agreement, Ahsoka changed course. She led them into the tunnel, silently hoping that the Force wasn't leading her astray. She could hear the howling of the beasts as they gained on them, but it wasn't too close for her plan to work. It seemed Naruto's clones had done their job of slowing down their pursuers. Go now, she said, judging that they were far enough into the tunnel. Naruto immediately created a dozen clones without breaking stride. Working together, each clone soon had a blue ball of spiraling energy hovering in their hands. Moving as one, the clones raced up the walls of the tunnel until they were standing upside down on the ceiling. As soon as they were all in position, the clones drove their Rasengan into the cracked duracrete of the tunnel ceiling. The blue orbs tore into the already weak structure, compromising it even further. When they detonated, that finally proved too much for the ancient ceiling. With a deep rumble, the duracrete gave way, collapsing down onto the front of the horde of hive rats and mutants. Their dying screams were lost amidst the deafening boom of the rubble hitting the floor. Naruto and Ahsoka kept on sprinting, desperately trying to outrun the collapse of the tunnel. Just when it seemed that they too would be crushed beneath the falling debris, the end of the tunnel came into view. With one last burst of speed, they managed to leap out of the crumbling tunnel into another wide-open cavernous space like the one they had just left. Behind them, the last of the ceiling came down, cutting off any possible route back that way. That was too close, Ahsoka said, gasping for breath. It was your plan, said Naruto, also somewhat winded. At least, it worked. Why didn't you use the Force to bring down the ceiling? Ahsoka asked. I still can't use it to do stuff like that unless I'm meditating, Naruto admitted. When I'm on the move, I'm better off channeling it as chakra for now. Master Yoda said I had to find peace within myself before I could use the Force like a Jedi. The two paused for a moment to catch their breath. Ahsoka checked that Tora had made it through unscathed. The Lothcat had somehow contrived to fall asleep sometime during their battle, as if the life or death ordeal was utterly unworthy of its attention. While she checked over the sleeping feline, Naruto noticed that her hands were shaking slightly. Hey, that was a pretty good plan, he said, patting her shoulder. You probably saved all our lives. She looked up at him and smiled weakly. The shock of her first battle was beginning to wear off, but the memory of the blood and gore still bothered her. The creatures may have been trying to kill them, but their deaths had still been the first she had ever experienced. When she had killed the hive rats, she had felt their deaths in the Force. Vicious animals they may have been, but they still had felt fear and panic as their lives slipped away. Still, she thought, they had done what they had to. She wasn't going to let herself be killed in some dark hole by monsters. She was pulled out of her thoughts by the sound of cursing. Looking up, she saw Naruto waving his arms about and letting out some of the most impressive swear words she had ever heard. Some of them were even new to her. What's up with you? She asked. I'm an idiot, Naruto said. I forgot that I could summon a messenger toad to send a message to Jiraiya-sensei. You forgot what? Ahsoka screamed. You're telling me that you could have sent a message for help an hour ago, but you forgot. Look, I'm sorry, okay, Naruto yelled back. I haven't been working with the toads for very long, so I forget what they can do. I just arf. Clenching his fists in frustration, Naruto turned and kicked the nearest pile of trash. As the debris flew into the air and clattered back down, he seemed to almost deflate. His shoulders slumped and his posture folded slightly. This wasn't how this day was supposed to go, he said miserably. This was supposed to be special. Ahsoka calmed herself down upon seeing Naruto so dejected. Walking over to him, she tried to offer him some comfort. Hey, don't feel too bad, she said. Those hidden tunnels were pretty cool. That's not what I'm talking about, Naruto said. I had a surprise for you in the tunnels. I had a cake and a bag of Ronto jerky for you. As a birthday present. Ahsoka gasped a bit at that. She had just turned 11 last week, but initiates were not encouraged to celebrate their birthdays or receive gifts. Jedi were not supposed to be attached to material possessions after all. It warmed her heart to know that Naruto had gone to so much trouble to try and make her birthday feel special. That was really sweet of you, Naruto, she said as she gave him a tight hug. Thank you. We'll just have to get out of here and get that cake before it goes bad. But I'm getting all the jerky. Naruto returned the hug, careful not to wake Tora. The two of them just stood there for a moment, taking comfort in each other's presence. It felt good to not be alone in such a grim and foul place. Finally, and somewhat reluctantly, they separated. There was still work to be done, and they were both acutely aware that more dangers lurked in the dark Undercity. Naruto found a clear space and quickly summoned a toad. It was around 20 centimeters tall, black with green markings on its face and arms. It wore a small yellow vest on its back. Hey there. I'm Keed. What can I do for you? Hi Keed. I need you to take a message to Jiraiya, Naruto said. When the toad nodded his assent, Naruto explained their situation to him. After a few minutes of talking, Keed vanished in a poof of smoke. He would have to have the elders reverse summon him to Jiraiya, as it was far too dangerous for him to try and make the journey on foot. Alright, let's keep moving, Naruto said as soon as the messenger toad had gone. It'll probably take him a while to get to Jiraiya. We may as well keep looking for something useful. Yeah, you're right, Ahsoka said, before sneakily adding, bet you I find something before you do. Oh, you're on, Naruto said, immediately rising to the challenge. Laughing, the two raced off to search the piles of trash. Their laughter echoed briefly in the Undercity, before being quickly swallowed by the darkness. Jiraiya and Luminara had been talking for well over an hour now. Their discussion had ranged from their own personal philosophies to Jiraiya's past life as a shinobi. It had now strayed into some rather embarrassing territory for the Sannin. "So, you truly used to write pornography?" Luminara asked in a deadpan. "Hey, don't knock my books," Jiraiya said. "I'll have you know they were the best-selling adult literature in the elemental nations. And you also used to act like some sort of lecherous pervert?" Luminara asked, her voice still completely deadpan. "I was a pervert when I was young," Jiraiya admitted. "Even as I got older and grew out of it, it was too useful a reputation to give up." "Useful? Every shinobi has a weakness." "Or had, at least," Jiraiya explained casually, as if talking about the weather. "And mine was beautiful women. Everyone knew it, and so my enemies sent prostitutes and seductresses to try and get information out of me." "How horrible. Perhaps I should have acted respectable, and only dealt with mere assassins and bounty hunters. That would have been so much better, I'm sure." Luminara looked at him in surprise. She wasn't quite sure what she had expected from him when she brought the topic up, but this certainly hadn't been it. Beneath the withering sarcasm was actually a decently reasoned argument. Even so, she wasn't entirely ready to let the subject go just yet. "And you're telling me it was all an act?" she asked skeptically. Jiraiya snorted at her question. "I'll admit, I do enjoy the sight of a beautiful woman," he said. She didn't miss the fact that he was looking directly at her when he said it, but she brushed off the implied compliment. Her appearance mattered to her only insofar as it related to her physical health and her professionalism. While being told she was beautiful wasn't unpleasant, it simply did not matter to her. Judging by his appraising glance at her total lack of reaction, Jiraiya had noticed that much. "It also came in handy while I was working as a spy," he said, changing the subject. "Oh. How so?" Luminara asked, her tone somewhat mollified. "No one wants to pay attention to some creepy pervert scribbling in a notebook," Jiraiya said. "They also never asked what I was scribbling as I watched women walk in front of palaces and fortresses. It also made tracking the people spying on me easier. People notice and remember beautiful women, and as I said, my enemies always hired such to keep tabs on me." Luminara was actually somewhat impressed. It was a remarkably devious piece of forethought on his part. Nevertheless, she still resolved to keep an eye on him. Old habits could sometimes die hard, she knew. Before she could frame her next question, she felt an odd pulse within the force. It was unlike anything she had ever felt before. Half a second later, a cloud of white smoke erupted next to her. She sensed no danger, but laid her hand on her lightsaber to be safe. Jiraiya, she noted, did not appear surprised or confused in the least. "Hey there, kid," he said. Luminara focused the force to translate his language for her. It seemed they had been joined by a large talking toad. "Hey yourself. Sorry if I'm interrupting something, but I have an urgent message from Naruto." "What's the message?" Jiraiya asked, frowning. His godson wouldn't use a messenger toad unless he was out of the temple, which he was not supposed to be. He said that he and Ahsoka were exploring some tunnels when they fell through a shaft and into the Undercity. They're stuck on level 1, and they're looking for a way back up now. They need help. Luminara jerked when she heard that. "Level 1, she said sharply. "Are you sure?" "That's what they said. All I know is that it was dark and smelly and scary down there." "What's so special about level 1? I haven't studied Coruscant's history yet." Jiraiya said. "Level 1 is supposedly a death trap," Luminara explained. "It's the lowest level of the megacity, nearly impossible to access, as near to the actual surface as you can still get. It's infested with all manner of predators and monsters, mutated by the pollution and darkness. Coruscant security won't even mount rescue operations for people who get stuck down there." Jiraiya stared at her for a few seconds before face-palming. "Trust Naruto to somehow find the most dangerous situation he can and jump right in," Jiraiya grumbled. "I swear, it's lucky my hair is already white, or else it would all turn gray from his antics." Sighing, Jiraiya shook his head, and then straightened up. As he did so, his whole demeanor shifted. All of a sudden, he was no longer the slightly goofy, overly sarcastic man she had been enjoying a conversation with for the past hour. Now he was a serious and seasoned warrior, his eyes hard and glinting with calm calculation. Seeing him now, Luminara had not trouble believing that this man had once been one of the most feared warriors ever to live amongst his people. "We need to hurry. They can't stay down there on their own," Jiraiya said firmly, all humor gone from his tone. Together with Luminara, he rushed out of the room. "Yes. Follow me," she said. "There's no time to get council approval. We'll take a speeder from the hangar and fly to the Undercity." "I thought you said it was impossible to get down there," Jiraiya said. His voice was calm, but the tension in his face gave away how anxious he was for his godson. Nevertheless, Luminara was impressed, and a little surprised, by his cool head. She had expected someone who espoused such views on attachments to be far more ruled by their emotions. "Perhaps, but we must trust in the Force," she replied. "We may find a way to get to them, or else they may find a way to get to us. Either way, we have few options." Within minutes, they had reached the hangar. Luminara quickly selected a 4-seater XJ-type airspeeder and primed it for takeoff. A few seconds later, they tore out of the hangar at top speed, Luminara piloting them towards the nearest access shaft to the lower levels. As they flew away from the temple, Jiraiya resummoned Keed, who peered curiously out at the gleaming spires of the metropolis. Catching the toad's attention, Jiraiya handed him a scroll he had pulled from his robes before saying something Luminara could not hear. Keed saluted them both before vanishing in another puff of white smoke. "What was that about?" Luminara shouted, straining to be heard over the roar of the wind and the hum of the engines. "I gave him a basic shinobi survival kit to take to Naruto and Ahsoka," Jiraiya yelled back. "It's got food, water, some weapons, a few tools, and even a comlink." "The comlink probably won't work," Luminara cautioned. "They're too far down, below all the power lines. There's too much interference." "It's better than nothing," Jiraiya said grimly. Luminara had no response to that, and so just kept flying. Soon enough they reached the huge shaft that led to the lower levels. As they descended, she silently hoped that the two younglings would be all right. Naruto and Ahsoka had been searching for anything useful for nearly an hour by the time Keed reappeared, scroll in hand. As soon as Naruto took the scroll from him, the messenger toad dismissed himself, eager to be gone from the dank Undercity. Unfurling the scroll, Naruto unsealed and inspected its contents. "All right, now we're talking," he said, looking excitedly at the small pile of equipment. "We've got a repair kit, some rations, clean water, fresh medkit, kunai, shuriken, explosive tags, ninja wire, and even a comlink." Sweet. Sadly, Luminara's prediction proved true. The comlink only picked up static. Groaning in frustration, Naruto passed it to Ahsoka, who pocketed it. Turning back to the rest of their new gear, he resealed the food, water, and tools. He divided the weapons between himself and Ahsoka. He kept all the explosive tags though, as Ahsoka wasn't able to use them. Now freshly armed and with their confidence boosted, the two of them resumed their search for an escape route. As they looked, they talked to break up the tedium. "Naruto, how did you know about my birthday?" Ahsoka asked. "I didn't even mention it. I asked Barris," he said. "You were the first friend I made in the temple, so I wanted to make sure I celebrated your birthday." "But why?" "I mean, getting Ronto jerky on Coruscant." "That must have been a lot of trouble," she said, confused. Naruto said nothing for a long minute. Ahsoka worried that she may have upset him somehow. Just when she was about to voice her concern, Naruto turned to face her. "I never got to celebrate my birthday back home," he said slowly. "I didn't have a lot of friends growing up, and no one ever cared when my birthday was. Birthdays are special, and I wanted yours to be special too." Ahsoka hid a wince at his explanation. She knew that Naruto's childhood was something he didn't like talking about. He freely and eagerly told stories about his amazing adventures with his old team, as well as some of his more memorable pranks, but he rarely, if ever, spoke about what his personal life had been like. "Besides, I'm Naruto Uzumaki, future Jedi Master. I can smuggle some Ronto jerky into the temple no problem," he added cockily. As he said the last bit, his eyes crinkled into a smile. He adopted what he probably thought was a cool pose, but Ahsoka thought it just made him look ridiculous. She burst out laughing at her friend's antics. The sudden humor contrasted sharply with the grimness of their situation, and was all the more welcomed for that. You are such a goofball, Naruto, she said between giggles. But you're also a really good friend. Besides, I know it wasn't quite how you planned it, but I'd say this still qualifies as a pretty special day to me. I certainly won't forget it at least. Naruto snorted with laughter at that. At least she wasn't mad at him, he figured. As he looked away from her, his eyes picked something up in one of the trash piles ahead. He squinted at it, before grinning to himself. He recognized what that was. Hey Ahsoka, guess what? He said. What? I win, he said smugly, pointing at his find. What do you mean you owe hell? She said, following his finger to the pile of trash. There, partially buried but still recognizable, lay an old, rusty airspeeder. It seemed mostly intact. Ha ha ha. Naruto laughed. I found it first, so that means I won our bet. That is so not fair, Ahsoka protested. I would have seen it first if you hadn't been distracting me. Hey, you're the one who asked me the questions, Naruto replied. I saw it first, and that means I won, but we never even agreed on a prize. Well, I guess that just means you owe me one. Now come on, let's see if this thing is fixable. Running over to the speeder, they began trying to shift the trash off of it. Eventually, with Ahsoka using the Force and Naruto using his clones, they managed to dig the old aircar out and drag it onto a clear patch of floor. Unsealing the repair kit Jiraiya had sent them, Naruto began inspecting the speeder. Alright, he said after a few minutes, I'm pretty sure I can fix it. It's mostly just dirty. I can clean out the engine ports and rewire the repulsor grid to bypass most of the damaged systems. It'll take time, but we should what? What's that look for? Ahsoka was staring at him as if he had just grown a second head. Since when did you know anything about mechanics? She finally asked. I thought you could barely hold a Hydra spanner. One of the older Padawans has been teaching me. His name's Anakin. He's a genius with anything mechanical. He's been tutoring me for almost 4 months now. And he taught you enough to fix this rust bucket? She asked, kicking the side of the speeder for emphasis. Yeah, Naruto said indignantly. At least I think so. There is one problem though. Oh really? Ahsoka said sarcastically. Just one? Yes, just one, he said, ignoring her tone. I can't fly it. He hasn't taught me how to do that yet. Well then I guess I'll just have to fly it, she declared. You can fly a speeder? Naruto asked, somewhat doubtful. I guess we'll find out, won't we? She said cheekily. I mean, it's not like I can let you have all the fun today. Snorting at that, Naruto broke open his toolkit and started working on the speeder. This is going to take a while, he thought. And who said this part was fun? I was right, Naruto thought. This did take a while. It had been over 2 hours since they had found the speeder. Naruto had been busy the whole time, trying to get the engine working. Ahsoka had been working on the flight controls, which had been more damaged than Naruto had initially thought. Overall though, he was optimistic that it would fly. Of course, he was usually optimistic about everything, but he was extra optimistic about this. I'm just about done here, he said as he spliced some wires together. How are you doing? I've still got 10 to 15 minutes until these controls will work, Ahsoka replied. But we should be able to fly this thing out of here. Ha! Things are looking up, Naruto said. I knew we'd be alright. It was, naturally, at this point that everything started to go wrong. Naruto tensed suddenly, and looked up. Just as he did so, a series of grunting roars sounded in the distance. You just had to jinx us. Ahsoka yelled. I blame you for this. This can't be my fault, Naruto protested. I didn't say it was your fault. I said I was blaming you, she responded archly. Together, they climbed to the top of the nearest trash heap to get a look at whatever was coming their way. When they saw it, it didn't look good. A pack of 5 vaguely simian creatures was ambling towards their location. The beasts were each between 3 and 4 meters tall, with patchy hair and leathery brown skin. They were all deformed in some way, each one unique and grotesque in its appearance. One had one arm much larger than the other. Another had an oddly sloped skull and an oversized lower jaw, giving it a nasty underbite. All of them looked dangerous. Coruscanti ogres, Ahsoka breathed. I thought they were just a myth. Well, it looks like no one told them that, Naruto said. They must have tracked our scent. Cursing under his breath, Naruto racked his brain for solutions to their dilemma. Latching onto the first idea that sprang to mind, he assembled a hasty plan. Ahsoka, you need to go back and finish fixing the flight controls for the speeder. I'll hold off the ogres, he said. What? No way, she cried indignantly. I'm not letting you fight those things on your dash. We don't have time to argue. I'm the better fighter, and you're the only one of us who can pilot that speeder. Go, fix it quickly, and pick me up as soon as you can. With that, he gave her a push towards the speeder. She gave him a stubborn look, and for a second he was afraid she would try and argue more. Then she sighed and started to run to the speeder. You better not die on me, you got that, she yelled over her shoulder. I'll be fine, he said in response, half to her and half to himself. All right, he thought to himself. Let's go barbecue me some ogre butt. He then jumped off the trash mound, flipping through the air. He landed with a grunt a few meters in front of the 5 misshapen brutes. They stopped, their tiny brains unused to food that ran towards them. Okay, you big ugly bastards, Naruto yelled at the top of his lungs. My name's Naruto Uzumaki, and you all are going down. The dim-witted ogres may not have understood his words, but they certainly understood a challenge when they saw one. Roaring with bestial fury, the lead ogre charged at the small yellow-haired figure before it. Its mind was filled with the need to crush this loud nuisance and prove its dominance over its territory once more. Its wild charge was not met with success, however. Before it had even crossed the halfway point, 4 Naruto clones burst out of the nearby piles of detritus on opposite sides of the path. 2 of them were already nearly done forming Razengans in the hands of the other 2. In barely a second, the 2 clones drove their attacks into the chest of the charging ogre. The beast shrieked in agony, the deadly jutsu tearing at its skin and the flesh beneath. With a thunderous boom, the 2 Rasengan detonated, sending the ogre flying back towards his companions. Oh, hell yeah! Naruto cheered, as the ogres stared on in shock. That's what you get when you try to fuck. His cheering turned to swearing as the ogre, the one he had just drilled with 2 Rasengan straight to the chest, stood up. It had 2 angry red welts on its chest, and was bleeding lightly, but it seemed otherwise unharmed. It seemed these ogres were made of tougher stuff than the previous predators he had faced down here. At some unseen signal, the 5 ogres rushed him as one. Cursing, Naruto threw 2 handfuls of shuriken at their faces. The metal stars barely even scratched their skin, but it did force them to cover their eyes. Taking advantage of his foe's brief moment of blindness, Naruto dashed to the side, hoping to draw their attention away from where Ahsoka was fixing the speeder. Forming his signature hand sign, Naruto created several dozen clones to harass the ogres. The beasts seemed to have gotten over their shock at his powers, however, as they met the clones' charge with one of their own. The 2 groups clashed in a din of feral roars and hoarse battle cries. Naruto's clones, despite their superior numbers, were not having much of an effect on the ogres. Their kunai inflicted only superficial cuts, while their taijutsu was essentially useless. Occasionally 2 of them would manage to work together to produce a hasty Rasengan, but even those only dealt relatively mild damage to the tough creatures. Despite their near invulnerability, the ogres weren't truly winning the battle either. Their toughness and raw strength was countered by how slow and clumsy they were, especially compared to Naruto's clones. Between their small size, natural agility, and limited force precognition, the clones were able to avoid being dispelled for the most part. This created a brief stalemate of sorts, which gave the original time to enact the second part of his plan. As soon as he saw his clones engage the ogres, Naruto sank into a meditation pose and closed his eyes. Calming his mind, he reached outside of himself, untangling the force from his own life force. As usual, the universe seemed to open up before him like a flower, his awareness expanding to include everything around him. He may have only been able to use the force for the most basic levels of precognition and sensing outside of meditation, but while meditating he was far more proficient. He reached out with his mind, seeking the minds of his foes. As he brushed past the identical minds of his clones, he found them. The ogres' minds were dim, burning sparks of animal instinct and basic intelligence, all spiky and slimy feeling. Naruto could tell immediately that he wouldn't be able to get them to run away. They were too angry, too hungry, and too vicious. The more peaceful option being a dud, Naruto went with his second choice. He couldn't convince the ogres to outright flee from the fight, but he could still influence their actions slightly. Recalling his lessons under Master Yoda, he sent subtle impulses into their minds. Move here. Step there. Go this way. That sort of thing. Nothing that they might not have done anyway, but now they did it to the tune of his plan. Slowly but surely, it worked. The group of ogres, still fighting what remained of the clones, worked themselves over to where Naruto wanted them. Within 2 minutes, all 5 ogres stood in between 2 large piles of metal scrap. Satisfied with his work, Naruto opened his eyes, sighed, and formed a single hand sign. Boom! The 2 piles of metal exploded, sending red-hot, razor-sharp shrapnel tearing into the ogres. Naruto had had a small group of his clones planting all the explosive tags Jiraiya had sent him in the 2 piles during the entire fight. He had effectively created 2 massive anti-personnel landmines, and stuck the ogres right between them. While his initial plan had been to get the ogres to run away, Jiraiya had successfully drilled into him the benefits of having a backup plan. Benefits which included not dying. Jiraiya was very big on the not dying thing. Naruto honestly felt a little sick at the sight before him. The ogres hadn't been killed, they were too tough for that. Instead, they were lying on the ground, whimpering in pain and fear, bleeding heavily from countless wounds, most of their skin badly burned. The smell of blood and charred hair filled his nostrils, nearly making him gag. He hated having to hurt them like this. He had felt them in the Force, and they hadn't been evil. Hungry, scared, and angry at their territory being challenged, but not evil. Even so, they had been a threat. Not just to him, but to Ahsoka. His best friend. He was not about to allow her to die down in this shithole. He'd lost one group of friends already. He wasn't going to lose any more if he could help it. If that meant he had to kill these things, then he would just have to do it quickly. Rushing forward, Naruto drew a kunai in order to end their suffering. As he reached the first one, he jammed the knife into its eye. He felt it stop at the bone at the back of the eye, and the ogre shrieked in agony. With a shout of effort, Naruto hit the pommel of the kunai with his palm. He felt the bone give way, and the knife slid home. He gave it a quick twist, and the ogre finally went silent, slumping to the ground. He yanked the kunai out with a sickening squelch, and prepared to move on to the next one. He killed 2 more of the ogres the same way. As he moved towards the next one though, a feeling of overwhelming danger washed over him. He froze, trying to tell where it was coming from. His answer came in the form of a deafening roar, far louder than anything the ogres could have produced. Even with his paltry Force senses, he still felt the new threat. He couldn't see it, but the screaming in the Force told him it was definitely nothing he wanted to tangle with. He closed his eyes, trying to extend his senses to locate whatever monster wanted to eat him now. It was getting closer, but he couldn't find it. Unfortunately, in his attempt to locate the source of the roar, he missed one of the remaining ogres struggling to its feet. The deformed creature was on its last legs, half its face blown off and one arm nearly severed, but survival instinct drove it on. Spotting the cause of its agony, the beast forced one last burst of movement from its dying body. With its remaining strength, it swiped at Naruto with its good arm. The blow was clumsy and glancing, but it still struck with the force of a bomb, enough to send Naruto flying more than 5 meters. Naruto screamed in pain as he went spinning into a pile of rubble. His left arm broke with a loud crunch from the blow, and he felt his shoulder wrench out of its socket too. As he landed in the scrap, his head struck something hard. Fortunately, his mesh armor kept any of the sharp scrap from impaling him, but it did nothing to cushion the blow to his cranium. He vaguely heard an ugly crack, and his thoughts began to drift away. He thought he heard a voice calling his name as his vision went dark. Just as Ahsoka finished repairing the airspeeder, she heard a large explosion from back where she had left Naruto. She rolled her eyes and shook her head. Taking Tora off of her back, she put him on one of the seats. She then jumped into the pilot's seat. That idiot, making me fix this piece of Banlapudu while he fights ogres, she thought as she fired up the engines. He better not be dead. Somewhat miraculously, after nearly 2 minutes of coughing and coaxing, the hastily fixed speeder actually lifted off the ground. It rattled and coughed like an old rust bucket that had been haphazardly repaired by 2 children, but it flew. It was as she began piloting it towards Naruto that she heard the awful roar. Unlike her companion, however, she could see what caused it. Emerging from a pit in the ground 100 meters or so from where she saw Naruto was something she didn't recognize. Whatever it was big. As big as that toad Naruto had summoned. Maybe bigger. It was too dark to see it clearly, but she got the impression of matted fur, red eyes, and lots of big teeth. More importantly though, the force was screaming danger to her. Whatever this thing was, it clearly was no friendlier than the other monsters she had encountered down here. Focusing back on her friend, she was just in time to see him get blindsided by one of the ogres. Its punch clipped him in the left side, sending him spinning into a pile of debris. "Naruto," she screamed, her heart skipping a beat at the sight of her friend being downed. Letting out a stream of words that would have gotten her a month of kitchen duty if Master Lean had heard them, she gunned the speeder towards Naruto's prone form. She could see the huge beast from the pit approaching, though it didn't seem to be in a hurry. She could make it. Pulling up alongside Naruto, she hopped out and grabbed him around the waist. Straining her muscles, she pulled him back towards the speeder as fast as she could. Come on," she grunted, acutely aware of the approaching monster. After what felt like hours, but was actually only about 10 seconds, she had Naruto in the speeder. Sweat dripping down her brow, she jumped in the pilot's seat and gunned the engines. She was just in time. As the speeder shot into the air, it just missed the snapping jaws of whatever it was that had crawled from that pit. The huge beast roared in frustration as its prey escaped, but it was in vain. Ahsoka sagged with relief as she clumsily piloted the speeder up towards the ceiling, looking for a way out. Chapter 10. Ahsoka was furious. Furious at the ogres for hurting her stupid friend. Furious at her stupid friend for letting himself get hurt by the ogres. Furious at the speeder for rattling like a pile of scrap. There were a lot of things to be furious at in her life at the moment. Glancing over at Naruto, she also had to admit that she was worried about him. Maybe. Just a little bit. Maybe a bit more than a little bit. Reaching for the flight controls, she put the speeder in hover mode. It wheezed like an injured panda, but it did stop in the air. Once she was satisfied that it probably wouldn't plunge them to their deaths, she moved over to check on Naruto. It didn't look great, she thought, but it also didn't seem terrible. His left arm was definitely broken in at least one place, maybe two. She thought his left shoulder may be dislocated as well, and he probably had some bruised ribs. She sighed a little in relief. He wasn't going to die. At least, not until she killed him for being such a colossal idiot and making her worry so much. Despite her relief at his stable condition, Ahsoka shivered a little. With Naruto unconscious, she felt alone down in the dark. She hated feeling alone. Togruta were highly social, and they instinctively avoided isolation. For them, isolation was worse even than it was for humans. She growled at herself, trying to shake off that feeling. She had just faced down a pack of monsters trying to eat her. She was better than this. Still, the feeling persisted, and so she sighed and reached for Naruto. Grabbing his uninjured shoulder, she gave him a gentle shake. "Naruto," she said, "wake up." He moaned lightly, but didn't wake. Frowning, she shook him harder. "Wake up! Come on! You need to wake up, Naruto," she yelled. "Why won't you wake up?" Naruto groaned as he sat up, rubbing his head. He vaguely remembered killing the ogres, then getting distracted by some new threat. One of the ogres must have clocked him, he decided. That explained why his head hurt, but why was the floor so wet? And what was that whooshing NOI? Oh no. He really hoped it wasn't what he thought it was. Opening his eyes, what he saw confirmed his fears. He was sitting on a water-covered floor in a rusty old sewer. Glancing to his right, he saw the bars of the cage. Behind them, the eyes of the Kyuubi glowed like huge lanterns in the gloom. They held a mocking light to them, as though the fox was cruelly amused at something. "So, you ended up here again, whelp. How utterly predictable. What's that supposed to mean?" Naruto snapped. "And why am I here anyway?" "You are here because you got knocked out in battle. And it was predictable because you are pathetic." Naruto growled at his tenant as he stood to his feet. He wasn't about to let himself be insulted by the giant hairball. "Who are you calling pathetic, Kyuubi?" he shouted. "Last I checked, you're the one behind the seal." The Kyuubi growled at this and took a swipe at the bars. Naruto stood his ground unflinchingly though, ignoring the rush of hot air. The fox quickly abandoned its assault on the cage and glared daggers at him. "Filthy human. Without my power you were nearly killed. Your little friend had to save your worthless life. You are nothing without me. Weak. Helpless. Stupid. Pathetic." "Hey, I wasn't being stupid," he replied. "I was protecting my friend. Not something you would understand. And how are you supposed to protect her when you are so easily defeated? You need my power. You will draw on it next time, I am sure. I'll never use your power again," Naruto yelled. "Your power is filled with the dark side. It's evil, and I promised never to use it." "Ha! You say that now, but just wait. Wait until you see how weak you truly are, until your friends lay dying and you are helpless to save them. No, you will give in to your anger. You will use my power. And eventually you will lose control. And then, I will destroy you and be free." "No!" Naruto shouted. "I'll protect my friends with my own strength. You'll see. Now I'm done talking to you." Turning his back on the Kyuubi, Naruto ignored its enraged roaring. He closed his eyes and focused on his mind. He pictured the seal, and pictured himself moving outside it. It was a technique Jiraiya and Yoda had come up with for him to escape his mindscape if the fox ever pulled him in here against his will. He felt a familiar sensation of rising, and the sound of the Kyuubi faded into the distance. Naruto opened his eyes just in time to see Ahsoka raise her hand in the air over his face. Her intention was clear, but it was too late. Before Naruto could even open his mouth to stop her, her hand descended. Slap. Ow. Damn it, Ahsoka, what was that for? Naruto complained as he rubbed his stinging cheek. "You're awake." Finally, Ahsoka said, relief mixing with irritation in her voice. "Yeah, I'm awake," he said, still irritated. "What was with slapping me? You wouldn't wake up," she said, glaring at him. "I tried shaking you, but it didn't work. You're hurt and I got worried, okay." Naruto closed his mouth with a click when he heard that. He hated worrying people, especially his friends. It made him feel like a jerk. Besides, now that she mentioned it, he could feel that he was hurt. His whole left side ached, and his arm and shoulder in particular were throbbing in agony. Taking advantage of his silence, Ahsoka kept on talking. "Don't ever tell me to leave you behind again, got it?" she said harshly. "I'm training to be a Jedi just like you. I don't need you protecting me. I wasn't Dash." "Don't tell me that's not what you were doing," she cut him off. "You could have sent some clones to finish fixing the speeder. I could have fought with you, and then you wouldn't be so injured." Naruto sighed, looking away. "I just didn't want you getting hurt," he said. "You're my friend, and it's my fault we're in this mess. I didn't want you getting hurt because of me." "That's my choice," she replied. "I'm never going to just abandon my friends, so don't ask me to. It's like that saying you told me about. Those who break the rules are scum, but those who abandon their comrades are worse than scum. Don't try and make me abandon my comrades." Naruto's eyes widened at that. He had not expected to have Kakashi-sensei's words used against him like that. Even so, it made him glad to know that his old teacher's saying had inspired someone else. It was probably the most valuable lesson Kakashi had ever taught him, and Naruto tried to live by it. Knowing that he had passed it on to someone else made him feel worthy of the trust Kakashi had placed in him when he gave him the masks. "You're right," Naruto said after a long pause. "I shouldn't have done that. I'm sorry." "Good," Ahsoka said with a satisfied nod. "Now, let's get your arm set." Naruto winced at that. This was going to hurt, and he rather doubted Ahsoka was in the mood to be gentle. Not that gentle was really an option in their current circumstances, but if it had been, she probably wouldn't have taken it. Gritting his teeth, he nodded, telling her to go ahead. Ahsoka pulled out the medkit Jiraiya had sent them and rummaged around in its contents. Pulling out a small syringe, she quickly stabbed it into his injured arm, injecting him with the contents. "Ow," he yelled. "What was that?" "It was just a painkiller, you baby," she said, smirking. "Did you have to be so rough with it?" Naruto whined. "Oh, just quit complaining. It should be kicking in soon." True to Ahsoka's word, he could feel a soothing coolness spreading through his left arm. In under a minute, the entire limb was nearly numb. Only a very mild ache remained of the previous throbbing pain. Naruto sighed with relief. "Okay, now for the hard part," Ahsoka said to herself. "I need to splint the bone and reset your shoulder. I'm pretty sure I remember how to do that." "Wait, what do you mean pretty sure?" Naruto asked, his eyes shooting open. "You do know what you're doing, right?" "Hey, I've only ever done this in class at the temple, okay," she said defensively. "Besides, do you have any better options?" Not bothering to wait for his response, Ahsoka pried an armrest off one of the chairs in the speeder. Bracing his, thankfully numbed, arm against it, she quickly pulled the bones back into alignment. Even with the anesthetic dulling the pain, it still hurt badly enough to tear a strangled grunt from Naruto's throat. She gave him an apologetic look and wrapped the whole thing in bandages, creating a makeshift splint. Naruto winced as she tightened them down, but between the painkillers and his naturally high pain tolerance he managed not to thrash about. "Okay, I have to put your shoulder back into socket now," she said. "You ready?" Naruto nodded, bracing himself. Ahsoka took his newly splinted arm, bending the elbow at 90 degrees. She slowly rotated the arm outwards, trying to ignore Naruto's pained grimace. Before too long she heard a slight pop, and Naruto groaned and bit back a curse. "How does that feel?" she asked. "Better," Naruto said eventually. "Thanks. Now you and Tora match," Ahsoka said, giggling. "You've both got bandaged limbs." "Hey, don't compare me to that demon Lothcat," Naruto said indignantly. Tora hissed at him, and the two started glaring at each other. Ahsoka just rolled her eyes. "Okay, you two, knock it off," she said. "We need to focus on getting out of here." Fine, Naruto grumbled, before looking around. The ceiling above them was riddled with holes and cracks like the one they had fallen through. Any one of them could lead to the upper levels, or more likely to a dead end. There was no obvious way to tell which was which. "Any ideas on that?" he asked Ahsoka. "It could be any of those passages, and we don't have time to check them all. The speeder won't last forever." "Will," she said after a pause, "Master Yoda always says that the Force should guide us. Do you think we could use the Force to sense which pathway is the right one?" Maybe?" Naruto said, uncertain. "I guess it can't hurt to try." "Let's do it. Together then," Ahsoka said, before closing her eyes. Naruto followed suit, and they both sank into meditation. As they relaxed into the Force, Naruto took one of Ahsoka's hands in his uninjured one. Together they reached and combined their Force senses. Ahsoka was awed by how powerful their connection to the Force became as they worked together. It was like a pulsing river of light, flowing through the both of them. She could feel Naruto's presence, a dazzling storm next to her. Turning her attention to the outside world, she directed their senses outward, looking for the way back up. Naruto, for his part, was amazed at Ahsoka's level of skill with the Force. She handled it with far greater ease and confidence than he could yet. He could also feel the difference in their power. He was stronger, certainly, but it was not by as much as he would have thought. Ahsoka was impressively strong in the Force, especially for her age, and she had far greater control of it than he had yet achieved. She then demonstrated that control by turning their combined senses to the problem at hand, looking for guidance from the Force. Together they felt for any signs from the Force directing them towards a specific tunnel. Most of the passages felt dead, for lack of a better word. As if they held no significance to their journey. Others, though, felt cold, dark, dangerous. Those, they both figured, led nowhere good. After several minutes, they felt something different. One of the tunnels, about 3 kilometers from their position, gave off a different feeling than the rest. To Naruto it seemed to glow, his mind's eye picturing it emitting a soft golden light. To Ahsoka, it gave off a comforting hum, her mantrals buzzing in harmony with it. Opening her eyes, she directed the speeder towards the safe tunnel, its position fixed in her mind. Beside her, Naruto stayed in his trance, keeping his focus, and hers, on the tunnel. In just a couple of minutes, they reached it. Okay, Ahsoka said. Let's hope we got this right. With that, she aimed the nose of the speeder up and gunned the engines. Naruto whooped as he felt the wind whip past his face. Tora, on the other hand, yowled and dug his claws into the seat at the sudden acceleration. Through level after level they climbed, the tunnel stretching before them. For the first few minutes the levels all looked about the same, ruined structures with barely any light. After a while, though, they started to change. Lights began to shine from some of the buildings, and more of them looked intact. The tunnel itself turned out to not really be a tunnel at all. It was a twisting path through broken floors and ancient access ports. Several times they had to stop their ascent and meditate again to find the correct path. It took nearly half an hour, but eventually they emerged into a relatively large open area, and Ahsoka leveled out the speeder. Though still quite dimly lit, it was blinding compared to where they had just come from. A few speeders buzzed through the air, and Naruto thought he could see an occasional person walking along the streets. It was still clearly run down, with many buildings obviously abandoned, but nothing looked like it was about to collapse. Glancing at the side of one of the structures they passed, Naruto saw the number 235. Hey, we made it out, he said. Nice piloting, Ahsoka. Where'd you learn to do that? For some reason Ahsoka's montrals and Lekko suddenly darkened with embarrassment. Don't worry about it, she said quickly, before changing the subject. We've still got a long way to go before we read the temple. Naruto was about to press for information on her apparent embarrassment when a sudden sound from near Ahsoka's seat drew his attention. Reaching down, he retrieved the source of the noise, which turned out to be the comlink. A voice was coming from it, saying the same thing over and over. Is Jedi Master Luminara Unduli, please respond on this frequency. I say again, Naruto Uzumaki and Ahsoka Tano, this is Jedi Master Luminara Unduli, please respond on this frequency. How far down are we now? Jiraiya asked, a touch of impatience coloring his voice. They had been flying for several hours now, but after they went below level 1200, things had slowed down considerably. The straight descending access shaft had been replaced with a series of much older, and much narrower passages. They twisted and turned, forcing Luminara to frequently stop and even double back as she attempted to navigate the maze. We just passed into level 650, Luminara responded. I'm afraid our progress will only get slower the further down we go. And there's still nothing from the comlink, he asked. Luminara had set up the comlink to continually transmit a message for Naruto and Ahsoka, in the hopes that eventually one of the groups would end up in range. No, not yet, Luminara said. We must be patient. You should try to release your emotions into the Force. It does no good to worry. Oh, I'm not worried, Jiraiya said. I know Naruto. He's the most determined kid I've ever met, and he's got a lot more skill than people give him credit for. From what I've seen of Ahsoka, she's the same way. Yet I still sense strong emotions from you, Luminara said. Are you not concerned that they will affect your judgment? Jiraiya knew she was mainly asking as a way to pass the time. Even so, he didn't take offense. The time did need passing, and continuing their earlier conversation was as good a way to do it as any. There's a lesson that I've been trying to teach to Naruto for a while now, Jiraiya began. He's still struggling with it, but he's making progress, and it's one I think could serve the Jedi well to learn. And what lesson is that? Luminara asked as she turned them down a narrow gap between buildings. That emotion should act as the wind in your sails, never the hand on your rudder, Jiraiya said. Interesting, Luminara said. So, you believe you can use emotions to fuel actions without having them influence your decisions? Yes. At least for some emotions, like love and joy, Jiraiya replied. Others, like jealousy and hatred, should be released as you say, and the choice of which sails to use would depend on what sort of weather there was. Luminara asked, her face thoughtful. And on what sort of boat you have. It's a rather good metaphor, if I do say so myself, Jiraiya said, grinning a little. I must admit, while the idea of releasing some emotions while accepting others is fairly common amongst the Jedi, using your emotions to fuel your connection to the Force strikes me as dangerous, Luminara said slowly, her voice somewhat troubled. It treads close to the dark side. Maintaining balance would be difficult. Everything worthwhile is, said Jiraiya. Besides, you're focusing on the wrong thing. Oh, yeah. You're too concerned with balance, with serenity. They're not as important as you make them out to be. Luminara frowned at that. Balance and serenity are the core of a Jedi. They allow us to dash. To make clear decisions without bias, I know. I've heard that line before. And sure, it's important to have a clear head when you need to make a judgment call, but the Jedi take it too far. How so? Luminara asked. You try to strip the emotions out of everything. Emotions can strengthen you, but only if you have the courage to accept them. Like I said, sails, not rudder. Luminara opened her mouth to respond, but was interrupted by a voice from the comlink. It was Naruto. This is Naruto Uzumaki to Master Luminara. Do you copy? Naruto, this is Jiraiya. How are you doing, kid? Are you and Ahsoka all right? He asked, relief flooding his voice. We're both fine. We've just know I am fine, Ahsoka. It's hey. Don't dash. There was the sound of yelling in the background, followed by a clattering noise. Before Jiraiya could ask what was going on, a new voice sounded over the comlink. Sorry, it's Ahsoka now. He is not fine. Naruto has a broken arm, a dislocated shoulder, and some cracked ribs. I set the arm and splinted it as best I could, and we got his shoulder back into socket, but he's still hurt. Ahsoka, this is Master Unduli. Where are you two now? Are you currently in danger? Luminara said, trying to steer the conversation towards productive ground. I think we're pretty safe for now. We found a speeder down there, and Naruto fixed it. I'm flying it right now, and we just got to level 235. Luminara blinked several times in astonishment. How did you learn how to pilot a speeder, youngling? That class is reserved for those 13 and up. The Force taught me, came Ahsoka's sheepish reply. Really? Luminara asked, an amused smirk on her lips. So, you aren't the youngling who has been breaking into the flight simulators at night for the past 3 months? Oops. The sound of Naruto's howling laughter could be heard through the comlink. It was cut off after what sounded suspiciously like an elbow hitting ribs. We'll talk about it later, Luminara said, still smirking. For now, I'm just glad it served you well. Now I need you to try and keep flying up. It isn't safe for you to land, and we can't get a lock on your position until you're closer. Understood, Master Unduli. We're heading up now. We should be Opudu. Ahsoka, what is it? Jiraiya asked before Luminara could speak. The engines just started to fail. I have to land. Ahsoka? Ahsoka! There was no response over the comlink. Luminara redoubled her efforts to find a path through the tunnels. Meanwhile, Ahsoka was starting to wish she had practiced crash landings during her illicit flight training. The engines were sputtering in and out, getting closer to total failure with each passing second. Thick, acrid smoke poured from the back of the speeder, its smell burning her nostrils. Can you fix them? She yelled to Naruto. She could barely hear her own voice over the din around them, but fortunately, Naruto's ears were quite sharp. We're falling out of the sky. Naruto shouted back. How am I supposed to fix them? Ahsoka bit back a retort and focused on the controls. She only recognized about half of them, but now wasn't the time to bemoan her incomplete education. Her eyes alighted on the ignition switch, and she flicked it off. The sputtering engines immediately cut out, and their jerky descent turned into an uncontrolled free fall. The sudden loss of gravity nearly flung Ahsoka out of her seat, but she managed to catch the steering column at the last second. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears as she pulled herself back into the speeder. In the background she could vaguely hear Naruto screaming something at her, but his words were lost to the wind. She blocked out the distractions and reached for the ignition switch again. Hopefully cycling the engines might just clear up whatever fault they had developed. Pushing against the wind was like moving her arm through mud, but push she did. After what felt like hours, but was in all likelihood less than a second, she flicked the ignition back on. Please let this work, she thought. This really needs to work. For one terrible, heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, for several more moments, it continued to happen. Just when she was convinced that they were going to die, she heard it. The heavenly sound of a repulsor engine spooling up. With an unhealthy sounding clatter and a juddering wrench, the engines fired back up, arresting their plummet. Are you crazy? Naruto yelled, his eyes the size of dinner plates. You could have killed us. I just saved us. Ahsoka exclaimed. Again. I think you mean to say thank you, Ahsoka, for your quick thinking and badass piloting skills. Naruto made as if to respond, but before he could, the recently reactivated engines burst into flame. You were saying, he snarked. Ahsoka took one look at the back of the speeder and swore violently. There was no way they could salvage the engines now. Their flaming transport began, once more, to pitch downward. Cursing, she aimed for the nearest landing platform, but they were losing height too fast. Grab Tora, she yelled. We're going to have to jump. Naruto grabbed the Lothcat, trying to ignore the immediate feeling of claws sinking into his arms. Wincing at the pain, he prepared to jump. Get ready, Ahsoka said, grabbing the comlink. On my mark. Now. As one, they jumped as hard as they could. Naruto managed to land on his feet, stumbling a bit as he hit the ground. Ahsoka wasn't so lucky, and she tumbled across the landing platform, coming to rest after a dozen meters. The force of the impact jarred the comlink from her hand, and it rolled off the edge of the platform. The speeder crashed into the wall below the platform with a loud crunch. It burst into a large fireball before falling into the darkness below. A distant thud echoed up the chasm several seconds later. Naruto groaned as the impact jolted his broken arm. The painkillers had begun to wear off some time ago, and his less-than-stellar landing sent lightning bolts of agony lancing through his entire left side. It was only with some effort that he didn't curl into a ball. Even so, he doubled over for a second, breathing heavily until the pain died back down. Once he felt that he could move without screaming, he looked up, searching for Ahsoka. He had seen her bounce across the ground out of the corner of his eye, but he hadn't seen where she had ended up. Worryingly, he hadn't heard her voice yet either. He soon spotted her, lying off to his left. She didn't seem to be moving, and his heart skipped a beat. Ahsoka! Ahsoka, are you okay? Naruto yelled, running over to her. Tora was tucked under his good arm, too dazed from the jump to savage him. To his immense relief, as soon as she heard his voice, she began to stir. By the time he had reached her side, she was already sitting up. She was dirty, bruised, and had several scrapes on her elbows, knees, and face, but she looked to be otherwise uninjured. I'm fine, but I lost the comlink, Ahsoka groaned. So much for your engine repairs though. My repairs? Naruto spluttered. It was your clumsy flying that burnt out the engines. There was nothing wrong with my flying, Ahsoka yelled. The speeder was shaking like a scared astromech droid. Because you didn't fix it right. I fixed it fine, Naruto snapped. You must have missed a few lessons when you broke into the simulator. By this time, both of them were face to face, glaring at each other and panting. After several seconds of this though, Ahsoka started to laugh, followed shortly by Naruto. There was more than a touch of hysteria to their laughter, but both were relieved to just be alive. Is there anything else that could go wrong today? Ahsoka asked sarcastically as she strapped Tora to her back again. As if in answer to her question, the door of the nearest building suddenly opened, and a group of armed men ran out of it. They were a mix of humans, Weequay, and Rhodians. 6 of them leveled blaster pistols at Naruto and Ahsoka, while the 7th, a human who was apparently in charge, watched on from behind the others. Okay, this one's definitely your fault, Naruto whispered to Ahsoka. Before she could reply, the apparent leader of the armed men began speaking. Well, what have we got here, he said. Couple of lost kids? Wandering somewhere they ain't welcome? Naruto bristled at the man's words, and at the arrogant, threatening tone the man delivered them in. He had never been the most patient of people, and between the multiple life-or-death battles against vicious monsters and the stress of crashing a burning speeder, Naruto's limited forbearance was more or less exhausted. He was in absolutely no mood to deal with petty thugs, armed or not. Hey assholes, you had better put those blasters down, he yelled. We've had a long day, and I'm about to dash. Shut up, you little brat, the man said, before addressing the armed thugs. Kill the boy, but bring the girl in alive. Pretty thing like her will be worth some money. We can sell her with the others. Bring the loath cat too. We could use some more food. Oh Kriff, Naruto said as the thugs aimed their blasters at him. Move! Naruto dived to the right, just in time to dodge the flurry of blaster bolts that whizzed by his head. They missed by mere centimeters, his movements a far cry from his typical speed and agility. He was hampered by his splinted arm, which forced him to forego all but the simplest acrobatics, and made hand signs too slow to be practical. Fortunately, Ahsoka was quick on the uptake. At the same time Naruto dodged, Ahsoka jumped forward. Sprinting towards the leftmost thug, a paunchy Rodian, she surprised him with a flying kick to the face. Her blow took him completely off guard, dazing him. Clearly these thugs had been expecting easy prey. Before the Rodian could recover the sudden blow, Ahsoka moved in once more. She grabbed his gun arm and, with a smooth twist, broke his wrist. He screamed in pain and his blaster fell from his hands, which she snatched from midair. A swift kick to his crotch brought the thug to his knees, his scream turning into a gurgling whine, and she slammed the handle of the blaster pistol into his temple. He twitched once and slumped over, unconscious. Letting the force guide her arm, she then threw the blaster as hard as she could at the next thug, a scruffy-looking human. It hit him in the hand with the sharp crack of breaking bone, forcing him to let go of his own blaster. Compared to the Rodian, this one seemed to be made of tougher stuff, as he merely grimaced and cursed angrily. He turned to face his assailant, unwittingly leaving himself open. Naruto had taken advantage of the sudden decrease in fire to move back towards Ahsoka's position. Noticing the distracted human, he grabbed a kunai from his weapons pouch. Unwilling to kill an unarmed enemy if he could avoid it, he jumped and slammed the ring end of the kunai into the base of the man's skull. The thug didn't even make a sound, he just crumpled to the floor as Naruto vaulted over his limp body. "Let's go," Naruto yelled as he ducked another bolt. "This way." Still dodging blaster bolts, he sprinted into a nearby alley, Ahsoka following right behind him. He could hear the thugs behind them, yelling and cursing as two children outran them. He smiled beneath his mask at their frustration. If there was one thing he always loved, it was frustrating his opponents. His good humor vanished in an instant, however, when he saw two more thugs step out of a doorway in front of them, a human and a weakway. Both had blasters leveled at him and Ahsoka. In a single instant, time seemed to slow down, and his mind raced for ideas. They couldn't go back, there were more thugs that way, still shooting at them. There were no other paths they could take to escape. Going forward was a must. There wasn't enough room to dodge, and even the most incompetent marksman would quickly be able to shoot both him and Ahsoka in such tight quarters. Knocking them both out or disarming them would take too long and had no guarantee of success. His left arm was still too injured to form hand signs. He had no choice. Gritting his teeth, Naruto flung the kunai in his right hand with deadly accuracy. It slammed into the weakway's throat with a soft squelch, burying itself up to the handle. Blood bubbled out around the knife, and the weakway grasped for it weakly, looking almost confused. His eyes flicked to Naruto, wide and astonished, as if he simply could not grasp what had just happened. His hand slipped off the hilt of the kunai and he made a horrible gurgling noise before stumbling and falling sideways, his life draining away through the hole in his neck. Even with his limited force senses, Naruto could feel Ahsoka's shock and horror, but he shoved that to the side. At least she kept running. The other one, the human, seemed mercifully slow on the uptake and had not started shooting yet. Taking advantage of the human thug's surprise, he jumped up into the air. Hopping from wall to wall, he quickly closed the gap between him and the frozen criminal. Without halting his forward momentum, Naruto wrapped his legs around the man's neck and twisted, slamming him into the ground head first. He could feel the man's neck snap as his head crashed into the floor at an awkward angle. He could hear shouts of rage and disbelief from the group of thugs behind him, out of sight around a corner, but he ignored them to focus on finding an escape route. In an instant he scanned the path ahead and spotted a suitable-looking hiding spot. There was an old abandoned-looking apartment building that he and Ahsoka could reach before their pursuers could see where they had gone. "There," he said, pointing at his choice. "Through that broken window." "Hurry!" Ahsoka said nothing, not trusting her voice. She merely nodded and ran towards the window Naruto had indicated. When she reached it, she jumped through, careful not to hit Tora on one of the sides. Naruto followed a moment later, and they both moved back from the window and hid in the shadows. Ahsoka could hear the thugs round the corner just a few seconds after they had hidden themselves. She watched as they passed by the window, not even slowing down. Only when their footsteps had faded from her hearing did she release the breath she had been holding. "Okay," she heard Naruto say. "I think they're gone." Ahsoka nodded again, still not trusting her voice. She had never seen someone die before, and she hadn't been prepared for it. It wasn't just the sight of it that was getting to her, it was the feel of their deaths in the Force. She had felt their terror, and then an awful feeling of nothingness. An absence where there had been presence. Intellectually, she knew that Naruto had had no choice but to kill the two men. Any non-lethal options would have taken too long. She was just shocked at how fast it had happened. One moment she had been staring at the two thugs, frozen in shock. Then, not 3 seconds later, both of them were dead, and Naruto was the one to have killed them. Glancing back at Naruto, she was surprised at what she saw. His eyes were unfocused, and what she could see of his face was pale. His hands shook slightly. "Those men back there," she said finally, her voice hesitant. "Are you okay?" She cursed herself internally. Of course, he wasn't okay. He looked sick. She could feel his inner turmoil without even focusing. "I'll be fine," Naruto said after a long pause. I hate having to kill." "How did you do that?" Ahsoka asked. "Act so quickly, I mean. I just froze?" She looked down in shame. Here she was, training to be a Jedi, and she had frozen like a mouse before a hawkbat. Useless. Helpless. Weak. She was broken out of those thoughts by the sound of Naruto's voice. "I froze the first time someone else tried to kill me too," he said in reply, getting a shocked look from Ahsoka. "Back there was let's say it's not the first time I've been in that position." Something about the way he said that made Ahsoka acutely aware of the fact that Naruto had once been a child soldier, and not that long ago. She had known that the whole time, of course, but she had never really stopped to consider what it meant before. Naruto had often told her and the other clan members stories from his past, but they were never of stuff like this. He told funny stories of pranks he had pulled, or the antics of his various friends and teachers. Looking back, even when he had told epic tales of his various missions, they had obviously been sanitized. As she recalled some of the stories, an awful realization began to dawn on her. "You've had to kill before, haven't you?" she asked quietly. "Back in your old home?" Naruto froze, and his eyes widened. Even though he stopped breathing. He looked terrified. Ahsoka cursed her insensitivity when she saw his reaction. Obviously, that would be a sensitive topic for him, for anyone really. Now he probably thought she was condemning him or something. Before she could apologize and reassure him though, he turned to speak to her. "Twice," Naruto whispered. The first time, during the bridge mission, 2 criminals had taken Tsunami and her son hostage. I just acted on instinct, and killed them both. The second time was during the invasion of my village. I had to kill several of the Odo shinobi while I was chasing Gaara. Ahsoka listened silently, remembering the stories he was talking about. Before, he had made it sound like some grand adventure. Now it sounded more like a nightmare. "I've always hated killing," Naruto said. "I guess I would have been a terrible shinobi. But those 2 thugs back there, that was so much worse than before. I could feel them die in the Force. It was awful." "Yeah, it was," Ahsoka said, not realizing she spoke aloud. Naruto jerked back, his eyes widening again as he realized the meaning of her words. "Of Force, I didn't even dash," he babbled. "I'm sorry, Ahsoka. I didn't mean to dash." "Hey, it's okay," Ahsoka interrupted, pulling him into a tight hug. "It's not your fault. You saved both our lives, all right? Again. So don't go blaming yourself. You don't have to protect me from everything. Got it?" Naruto stiffened at first when she hugged him. Slowly though, he began to relax and return the embrace. "Why didn't you tell us this stuff before?" Ahsoka asked as they separated. "I wasn't ready to talk about it," Naruto said, looking down. "I just want to remember the good times from back then. The rest, well, let's just say that it isn't very happy." "You can tell me," Ahsoka insisted. We're friends, right? Look, I don't want to talk about it, Naruto snapped, glaring at her over his mask. After a few seconds he sighed and relaxed. I'm sorry, he said. Just, let's drop it. Please. Ahsoka frowned, but sighed and relented. Fine. How are your injuries? Naruto eagerly took the change of topic, wanting to steer the conversation onto less contentious ground. Not too bad, he said. They should be all healed by this time tomorrow. Ahsoka looked at him askance. She couldn't have heard that right. Naruto, you have a broken arm, she said slowly, as if talking to a very young child. Even with Bacta, it'll still take at least 3 days to fully heal. I heal really fast, Naruto said hastily. It's a shinobi thing. Ahsoka stared at him for a long moment, debating on whether or not to challenge the obvious lie. Eventually though, she decided that if he didn't want to tell her, then it wasn't her business. From the look on his face, it had something to do with his past, a subject he clearly wasn't comfortable discussing. Well, that's different, she said. In that case, we should get going. We can't, Naruto said. We can't leave yet. What? Ahsoka said sharply. Why not? The leader of those thugs, when he talked about selling you, he mentioned others, Naruto said. I think these guys have other prisoners. We have to find out and help them. We what? Ahsoka yelled. How are we supposed to help? You're injured. We have kunai and a few shuriken. Neither of us know how to use blasters. What are we supposed to do? I don't know, but we have to try, Naruto said stubbornly, crossing his arms. Jedi are supposed to help people, and those prisoners need our help. Ahsoka blinked rapidly for a few seconds, before her face set with determination. Fine, but we need a plan first, she said. We can't just rush in guns blazing. We don't have guns for one thing. We'll rest here for a few hours, Naruto decided. That'll give those thugs time to calm down, and my arm time to heal enough to use hand signs. We can plan more then. Sighing, Ahsoka pulled Tora into her arms and sat down to take a nap. If she was going to do this, she wanted to be well rested. This had been a long day. Chapter 11. Ahsoka awoke to what sounded like someone being murdered with a broken musical instrument. Looking around wildly, she spotted the source of the commotion. It turned out to be Naruto and Tora, rolling on the ground in a mess of claws and limbs. What are you two doing? She hissed as she pulled the enraged loafcat off of Naruto's face. As soon as he was in her arms, Tora calmed down and began purring like an engine. They'll hear us. I came over to wake you up, and that demon cat tried to claw my face off, Naruto said, glaring at the now purring feline. I swear that thing's crazy, it freaking hates me. Well, maybe he's just scared of your mask, Ahsoka suggested innocently. If you took it off, he'd probably like you. Naruto shot her a deadpan look. Nice try, he said. But you'll have to try harder than that to get my mask off. He smiled at Ahsoka's pout. She and the rest of the Clawmouse clan had been trying diligently to get his mask off ever since the day he had first met them. So far, none of them had managed it. Their baffled expressions when he somehow managed to seemingly eat and drink through the mask had him nearly pissing himself with laughter. He had been very grateful to Jiraiya for showing him the trick behind that skill. Pfft, whatever, Ahsoka said, masking her disappointment. What were you waking me up for anyway? Oh, right. My arm's healed enough to work with, Naruto said. Sure enough, much to Ahsoka's shock, his arm was indeed far more mobile and less swollen than it had been just 3 hours earlier. It's time to rescue those other prisoners. And how are we going to do that? Ahsoka asked. I assume you have a plan. One that doesn't end up with you half dead this time. I'm working on it, Naruto replied, scratching the back of his head sheepishly. Ahsoka raised a skeptical brow at his less than convincing response. First, we have to do some recon. I'll send out some clones to take a look. Naruto formed his signature hand sign, creating a dozen identical copies of himself. Alright boys, you know the drill, he said. Go scout the perimeter, but stay out of sight. Dispelled when you've seen everything. Why'd you have to make us when you've got a busted arm? Complained one of the clones. This shit hurts, you know. Just shut up and do what you're told, Naruto growled. He hated it when his clones got mouthy. Sometimes they just seemed to come out wrong, and it was always a pain in his ass. Hey! You can't treat me like that, the same clone yelled. We've got rights. I demand that you grrk. The clone's rant was cut off mid-sentence when Naruto stabbed a kunai into its head. Glaring at the rest of the clones, he jerked his head towards the window. Get going, he said. Unless someone else has anything to say. The remaining clones rapidly shook their heads, eyes wide and faces pale. With speed that would have put some Jedi Knights to shame, they jumped out the window and dispersed into the shadows. To their credit, they managed to do so without making even a hint of noise. Stupid back-talking clones, Naruto muttered. More trouble than they're worth. That was harsh. Aren't you basically insulting yourself? Ahsoka asked, a little weirded out by the whole display. While the clone's destruction hadn't felt like a death to her force senses, it was still more than a little unnerving to see her friend stab himself in the head so casually. Hey, you don't have to deal with them, Naruto said. You'd snap too. I have to deal with you, she responded, rolling her eyes. You don't see me trying to stab you whenever you won't shut up. Although, now that I think about it, what are you talking about? Naruto asked, seemingly mildly offended. I'm awesome. It's the clones who are a pain in the ass. Aren't they supposed to be identical copies of you? Ahsoka asked, staring at him like he was being dumb. Well, oh, shut up, Naruto sputtered, looking away. Ahsoka giggled, smiling at her verbal victory. She then settled down to wait for Naruto's clones to report back to him. They had used them as scouts for various pranks before, so she was familiar with how the process worked. Sure enough, 30 minutes later, Naruto twitched slightly and sat up straight. His eyes glazed for a brief moment before he snapped back to reality. Ahsoka recognized the signs that his clones had just dispelled. The frown on his face wasn't promising though. Bad news, she asked. Yeah, Naruto said. Those bastards have got that building locked down tight. I didn't see any holes in their security we could use. They've got 2 guards on each door, what I think are sensor pods on the windows, and they're sending out 2-man patrols to scout the area. Whatever they have in there, they really don't want anyone getting to it. So now what? Ahsoka asked. We have to save those prisoners, but it looks like we can't get in without being caught. Naruto's eyes narrowed at that. Something about the way she had said that planted the beginnings of an idea in his head. As it came together, his eyes lit up. That's it, Ahsoka, he said eagerly. We'll go in as captives. Well, you will anyways. I'm sorry, what? Ahsoka said blankly, before fixing her friend with a skeptical look. Have you gone crazy? Because it sounds like you've gone crazy. No, it'll be good, Naruto said. They said they wanted to capture you, remember? Yeah, Ahsoka replied. I also remember that they wanted to sell me. Well, that's what I'm counting on. We'll take out one of the patrols. I'll henge myself and a clone into the guards, and we'll take you to the front door and say we've captured you. Once they see who it is, they'll let us in, no problem. By the end of his explanation, Naruto was all but hopping with excitement. He had never had a chance to actually infiltrate a secure facility before. It had been one of the missions he had most wanted to go on as a shinobi. Though he may have left that life behind, the prospect of actually doing this was making him giddy. Ahsoka wasn't quite as thrilled. It was actually a good plan, she had to admit. Probably better than what she could have come up with, though she wasn't about to tell Naruto that. She did, however, have one major problem with the plan, which she wasn't shy about sharing. Why do I have to be the captive? She asked. Why can't you do it? Because they wanted to kill me. They only wanted you alive. Tora and I would just get shot, Naruto said, and Ahsoka nodded her understanding. Privately, he considered the unpleasant implications of the thugs only wanting Ahsoka as their prisoner, but he stayed quiet on that. That was not something he wanted to contemplate right now. Fine. But this had better not become a regular thing. I am not playing some captive little girl more often than I have to. And what are we going to do about Tora? Ahsoka asked. We can't abandon him here. Naruto was stumped at that. He couldn't bring himself to abandon the Lothcat, vindictive monster though it may have been. He also couldn't see a way for him to smuggle the cat into the building along with Ahsoka. While he was mulling the problem over in his head, Ahsoka snapped her fingers. "I've got it," she said. "Torra can walk pretty well now. The back-to-spray helped him a lot. If I can connect with him, I can tell him to wait for us outside the building. He can stay hidden and meet up with us when we free the prisoners." "Ha! That could work," said Naruto, before shooting a glare at Torra. "If you can convince Torra to wait outside rather than try and claw my face off." Again, Torra flattened his ears against his head and hissed at Naruto, before turning back to Ahsoka. He mewed at her, before licking her face gently. The young Togruta giggled and scratched his head. "I don't know what his problem is with you, but he seems to like me fine." "Clearly, he just has excellent taste," she said, smiling at Naruto's eye roll. "I'm betting I can get him to wait for us. I'll just promise him that he can claw your face off later." Naruto sputtered indignantly at that, before walking off grumbling as Ahsoka smirked at him. Satisfied that she had won that exchange, she focused on the loafcat in her arms. Closing her eyes, she sank into the Force as best she could. She reached out with her mind, feeling for Torra's presence. When she found it, she was startled by how strong he was in the Force for a non-sentient animal, but she set her shock aside. Focusing on their plan, she made the connection. Torra stopped purring and stared at her for almost a minute. Eventually, Ahsoka opened her eyes and set the loafcat down. He paused for a moment and then walked over to the open window and jumped out. Within a few seconds he was gone from their sight. "I think he understands," she said. "He'll wait for us to come out of the building. Now we just have to find one of those patrols," Naruto said. "Let's go. There should be one nearby." With Naruto in the lead, they climbed out of the window and back into the deserted street. After taking a moment to get his bearings, Naruto took off running down one of the alleyways. He led Ahsoka through the twisting warren of narrow streets for several minutes, until they reached a three-way intersection. A series of small balconies lined the walls above the street. Remnants of old housing units, Ahsoka thought. "All right, from what my clone saw, there should be a patrol coming through this intersection eventually," Naruto said. "Let's hide. When they come down here, we can ambush them." Ahsoka nodded, and watched as Naruto walked up the wall onto one of the balconies and seemingly vanished into a pool of shadow cast by broken light. She was always impressed by how stealthy he could be when he chose. She could still feel his presence, though she wasn't advanced enough to get a sense of direction, but to her eyes he was a vague, barely discernible shape in the shadows. No one who wasn't looking right at him would even suspect he was there. Selecting her own hiding spot, Ahsoka jumped onto a balcony opposite Naruto's, hiding behind an empty planter. She was grateful for her Togruta heritage now more than ever. Her stripes and facial markings may have been eye-catching in open daylight, but here in this place of broken shadows and dingy illumination, they served as remarkably effective camouflage. She also had no need to see the street below to know when the two-man patrol would pass. Her montrals may have only been a few centimeters tall at this point, but they gave her enough of a sense of her surroundings to tell whether or not two people were walking not even 5 meters from her position. In the end, her advanced senses turned out to be unnecessary. After a few minutes of waiting, she heard the loud stomp of heavy footsteps and the echo of voices. The two thugs coming down the street weren't even trying to be stealthy. Hell, even if she had been totally deaf, she could still have smelled them. They positively reeked. Across the street, Naruto was having similar thoughts. These thugs were clearly little more than untrained brutes. They reminded him of the dumb muscle Gato had used at the bridge in Nami no Kunai. This was going to be easy. As soon as the two guards had passed below his position, he made his move. Wary of aggravating his still healing arm, he chose to deal with his target with a kick. Flipping over the railing of the balcony, he dropped an axe kick directly onto the uncovered head of the thug nearest to him. The man never even had time to cry out. He crashed to the ground like a felled tree, instantly unconscious. As soon as she felt Naruto move, Ahsoka sprang into action. She grabbed a fist-sized piece of broken masonry and dropped down behind the second guard. As he turned to face the noise of his fallen companion, she kicked him in the back of the knee. His leg collapsed under him, and taking advantage of his now lowered head, she swung the rock in her hand at the back of his skull, careful not to accidentally crush his head. It connected with a dull thud. Much like his fellow, he flopped to the ground without even a sigh. The whole affair had taken perhaps 3 seconds from start to finish. So far, Naruto's crazy plan seemed to be working. Naruto moved quickly to restrain the fallen men. He tied their wrists and ankles with ninja wire from their survival kit. He gagged their mouths with spare bandages before searching them for anything useful. He relieved them of their blasters, a few key cards, their ID cards, and several vibraknives. "Damn," he said. "I was really hoping these guys would have a comm link on them so we could contact Jiraiya. They probably have a communication system in their base," Ahsoka said. "We'll just have to use that." Naruto nodded and turned back to their 2 captives. He created a clone and, after a careful examination, hinged himself into one of the thugs. His clone repeated the action with the other thug. Patting his newly transformed body, he turned to Ahsoka. "How do I look?" he asked her. "Like a criminal Slimo," she answered cheekily. Naruto just laughed and fist bumped his clone. "That's the idea," he said. "Now help me drag these 2 out of sight. We don't want them getting found." Working together, Ahsoka and the transformed Narutos managed to drag the 2 unconscious thugs into one of the nearby abandoned buildings. They hid them in an out-of-the-way closet, which they secured with more ninja wire. Picking up one of the blasters, Naruto examined it for a few seconds. He then set it to what he thought was stun and tested it on a nearby table. The telltale blue ring of a stun bolt flashed out, briefly illuminating the room. With that done, Naruto and his clone strapped the stolen blasters to their hips and pocketed the IDs and key cards. As they walked back onto the street, the hinged Naruto drew his stolen blaster while his clone held Ahsoka's arms behind her back. "Okay, you ready for this?" he asked her. "Yeah," she said. "I've got the easy part. Are you sure you can talk us past the guards?" "Of course, I can," Naruto said confidently. "I'm Naruto Uzumaki. I can do anything." Ahsoka rolled her eyes at this, but smiled a little in spite of herself. There was something almost infectious about Naruto's endless confidence. It seemed to rub off on you after a while, and it helped boost her own confidence in their plan. Still, she wasn't about to let an opening like that just pass her by. "Sure, except for fix a speeder engine properly," she said, nudging him with her shoulder. He gave her a look of mock hurt before chuckling a little. It was a relatively short walk back to the front door of the guarded building. When it came into view, Ahsoka saw that Naruto's clones had indeed given accurate intel. There were 2 armed guards outside the door. Judging by the dark blue bruise on his face, one of them was the Rodian she had knocked out earlier. The other was a short, balding human with a bushy red beard. "Mac and Velan, what are you 2 doing back here?" the Rodian asked. "You blind?" Naruto's clone asked, pushing Ahsoka into the light. "We got that girl what was sneaking around earlier." "Hey, that is her," the human said. "Man, boss'll be thrilled you got her. He was pissed when she got away." "You see the boy she was with?" "Nah, he probably ran off and hid somewhere," Naruto drawled. "Why didn't you stun her?" the Rodian demanded rudely. Naruto just leave him a bored look. "What do I need to waste a shot on her for?" he said. "She's tiny. She ain't going nowhere." Ahsoka shot her captor a glare at that. She made a big show of trying to squirm out of the clone's grasp, before receiving a light, but convincing, smack to the back of the head. "See, she ain't going nowhere," Naruto repeated. "Now, you gonna let us in, or what?" The bruised Rodian glared at Ahsoka for a few seconds, before shrugging his shoulders. He punched a quick code into the keypad by the door, and it hissed open. "Fine, take her down to the cells," he said. "Put her with the others, but hurry up. You ain't on a break." Yeah, Naruto said as his clone pushed Ahsoka through the open door. "We'll take as long as we like, and you'll deal with it." With that he followed his disguised clone through the door. It hissed shut behind him, cutting off the Rodian's angry retort. Glancing around, he was relieved to see that the front hallway was clear of people, and had no apparent cameras. That would make this easier. He was interrupted by Ahsoka's annoyed whisper from in front of him. "I am not tiny," she said, glaring a hole in his head. "You are so going to pay for that later." "I'm quaking in my boots, pipsqueak," Naruto teased her, before refocusing on the job at hand. "Which way do you think it is to the cells?" How am I supposed to know? Ahsoka butt out. She was still a little sore over the pipsqueak comment. Let's start on the lowest level and work our way up. This place isn't that big. Naruto just shrugged and went with it. It was as good a plan as any. He just hoped they didn't run into anyone else on the way. It wouldn't be easy explaining why he was apparently lost in the place he was supposed to work. Though given how stupid these thugs seemed, it might not be too much of a stretch. Luck was with them, however. Though the three of them passed several people in the halls, no one stopped them or threw them a sideways glance. A few of the rougher-looking thugs leered at Ahsoka as she passed, but none of them tried anything. Naruto was relieved at that, as he wasn't sure what he would have done if one of those degenerates had tried assaulting his best friend, only that it would have been violent, and it definitely would have ruined any chance they had at stealth. It took a few minutes, and some wrong turns, but before too long they had arrived at the cell block. Sadly, but perhaps not surprisingly, there were two more guards outside the entrance to the cells. Naruto, trusting in his disguise, walked up to them, roughly pushing Ahsoka along. "Got one for you," he said. "Just gotta put her in with the others." "Hey, you know the rules," one of the guards grunted, glaring at him. His breath reeked like rotten meat. "No one goes in there but us. Just hand her over and get back to patrol." "Sheesh, fine," Naruto said, rolling his eyes. "Here you go." Naruto pushed Ahsoka towards the guard with the rotten breath. He grabbed her head tightly as his companion pulled out a keycard. He never got to use it, however. As soon as Naruto saw the keycard, he leveled his stolen blaster at the guard holding Ahsoka. His clone did the same with the other guard. They both pulled the trigger at the same time, blue stun bolts flashing like lightning. The two guards let out strangled grunts before collapsing into twitching heaps. Ahsoka, who had ducked as soon as Naruto had raised his blaster, grabbed the keycard and used it to open the door to the cells. "Okay, I'll admit it," she said as they dragged the stun guards into the room. "That was pretty cool." "Damn right it was cool," Naruto said. He quickly created two more clones, who hinged into the guards they had just taken out. The two clones then posted outside the door to the cell block, keeping watch. While they did so, he dropped his hinge and turned to look at the cells. He had been right. There were prisoners here. Over a dozen women and young girls were locked in the cells. He saw Twi'leks, Nikians, humans, even a young Deling girl no older than 6. They had clearly been mistreated, sporting bruises and cuts across their bodies. They wore collars of some sort, and all of them looked scared and confused. Naruto growled deep in his throat, his temper flaring to the surface at the sight of such inhumanity. It was a struggle not to just start shouting at the sheer vile cruelty of whatever gang this was, but he mastered his anger with difficulty. He brought one of Master Yoda's many lessons to mind, that anger was a poison, clouding his vision and making him foolish. He needed a clear head at the moment, or they were all going to get caught. A muttered curse drew his attention to Ahsoka. He looked over at her, taking in her clenched fists and stiff shoulders. Clearly, she was just as angry at this as he was. I know, Naruto said. I'm pissed too. But we're here to help them now. Open the cells, quickly. Ahsoka nodded and moved throughout the room, opening the cells with the keycard she had taken from the guard earlier. The prisoners stumbled out of their cells, looking around anxiously. Even Naruto's senses could detect their fear. He moved over to a couple of the older prisoners, a pair of Twi'leks in their mid-20s. They eyed his approach nervously, wary of any potential threat. We're here to rescue you, he said. I'm Naruto, and that's Ahsoka. Why did these guys take you? They took us to be sold as slaves. Black Sun pays this group to provide them with girls for their clubs and brothels, one of the Twi'leks said. Damn it, Naruto cursed as his suspicions were confirmed. I thought slavery had been abolished in the Republic. How could they let something like this happen? The Republic doesn't care about us, the other woman spat. They and their Jedi never look at what happens to little people. Now how are you going to rescue us? You two are just children. Hey, we're not just any kids, Naruto said indignantly. Internally he was frowning at her words about the Jedi and the Republic, but he pushed them aside for now. We're Jedi initiates. The The Jedi sent 2 kids down here to save us, another woman asked from behind him. She was human, perhaps 18. She looked skeptical of his claim. Well, they didn't exactly send us, Naruto said. We sort of got lost. But we stumbled on this place and decided to rescue you. Great, the human teenager said, rolling her eyes. We're all going to die. Hey, do you have a better option, lady? Ahsoka asked sharply, as she freed the last of the would-be slaves. We've got a plan to get you out of here. We do have a plan, right, Naruto? Yeah, of course we do, Naruto said, his mind racing. He hadn't actually planned on how they were getting the prisoners out of the compound. Fortunately for him, he always thought best on his feet. A few seconds of brain-racking produced what he thought was a workable plan. Or most of one at least. I'll cause a distraction and lure the guards away from here, he said after clearing his throat. Once they're all gone, Ahsoka will lead you all to the landing platform. There are speeders there that you can steal and use to get away. I'll meet you at the platform as soon as I lose the guards, so don't leave without me. Are you kidding me? The human girl asked. That'll never work. There are guards outside the door to the landing platform. We'll get shot to pieces. Several of the other prisoners nodded. A few voiced similar objections. Naruto could see the fear and defeat in their eyes. They hadn't had hope in so long that they had forgotten what it felt like. He frowned and stepped forward. Listen, he shouted, quieting the growing din. I promise you that this will work. You can't just give up without even trying. You all have a chance now, don't just walk away from it. If you all work together, I know you can do this. What about the guards? Someone asked. You won't be able to lure all of them to you. Naruto gained an evil look in his eyes. Ahsoka instinctively stepped back and checked for tripwires. She had seen that look before, and it always portended a particularly inventive piece of mischief on Naruto's part. Trust me, the guards will be plenty distracted with what I'm going to do. Besides, Ahsoka will be able to take care of any that I miss, Naruto said confidently. You can trust her. She's one of the most amazing people I know. Ahsoka smiled at the compliment, warmth swelling in her chest. She wasn't a huge fan of Naruto's plan, as it involved her leaving him again. This time, though, he wasn't doing it to protect her. He was trusting her to keep all of these people safe. That absolute confidence in her ability filled her with determination to not let him down. She could see that his words had affected the prisoners as well. There was a light in their eyes that had not been there a minute ago. Their posture stiffened, and the oppressive aura of defeat and despair had lightened. One of them still needed some encouragement, however. The little Dylan girl was clearly still scared, and fighting not to cry. Ahsoka walked over to her and leaned down to her eye level. Hey there, she said softly, smiling at the frightened girl. What's your name? I am Aika, the young girl said, sniffing. That's a very pretty name, Aika, Ahsoka said. Now, can you do me a big favor, Aika? Aika looked at her with wide, curious eyes. She sniffled again before wiping her nose and nodding. I need you to be very brave for the next little bit, okay? Ahsoka said. You can do that for me, can't you? Aika nodded again, trying to look determined. That's great, Aika. Now stick with one of these ladies and don't wander off. I'm going to get you out of here. Aika nodded again and gave Ahsoka a shaky smile. She then dashed over to one of the Twi'leks Naruto had been talking to earlier. The Twi'lek woman gave the girl a quick hug before grasping her hand tightly. Meanwhile, Ahsoka went over to Naruto. Thank you for trusting me this time, she said to him. Be careful out there, please. I don't want to have to patch you up again. You too, Naruto said, nudging her shoulder. Don't worry about me. I've got this. I'm Naruto Uzumaki, best Jedi initiate ever. Ahsoka rolled her eyes at that and gave him a friendly punch on the shoulder. Feeling something hard being pressed into her hand, she looked down. She saw one of the blasters from the guards Naruto had stunned earlier. Turning the weapon over in her hands, she glanced up at Naruto curiously. Just in case, he said seriously. I'm pretty sure it's set for stun. It turns out they're not that complicated. Ahsoka accepted the blaster reluctantly. She still wasn't too sure about actually using it. Still, it was better to have it than not, she figured. She tucked it into her belt and gave Naruto a nod. Wait for 3 minutes, then check the hallway, he said. Go as soon as it's clear. I'll meet you at the speeders, I promise. With that, he rushed out of the room. The door shut behind him as he ran down the hall. He sprinted, as quietly as he could, until he was out of sight of the cell block. Fortunately, he had not encountered anyone else yet. It seemed the lower levels weren't as crowded as the upper ones. The first thing he did once he stopped was create nearly 24 clones, filling the hallway with masked blondes. Okay boys, he said. You know what to do. Let's go show these guys just who they decided to mess with. His clones gave a cheer before they all formed a quick hand sign. Oryoke no Jutsu, came the cry from the crowd of clones. A puff of white smoke later, and where there had once been a hall full of masked blonde boys, there now stood a group of incredibly attractive, and scantily clad, blonde women. Their collective clothing might, if combined by a skilled tailor, have managed to cover a small child, but it would have been close. Let's see these assholes try to fight when you look like this. Charge! Naruto yelled at his platoon of scantily clad female clones. They saluted as one before pivoting and running off down the hall, screaming at the top of their lungs. It wasn't long before they attracted attention. Within just 10 seconds, a group of 3 armed thugs turned up, looking for the source of the noise. When they found it, their reactions were rather spectacular. The sight of dozens of nearly naked blonde bombshells running through the halls of their secure base screaming battle cries proved too much for the first one, an older-looking Weequay. His eyes rolled back into his eyes and he fainted dead away. His fellows were too distracted to even think about catching him, so he hit the floor with a painful-sounding thud. The other 2 managed better, but only very slightly. One froze with his mouth open for a second, torn between lust and fear. It seemed fear won, as he turned on his heels and fled the way he came, screaming for help. The final man, another Rodian, seemed to have somewhat more sense than either of the others. He cursed violently in a language Naruto didn't yet recognize, and drew his blaster. Backpedaling rapidly, he fired as fast as he could into the approaching mob of angry blondes. His shots mostly went wide, shock and fear disrupting his aim. The walls and ceiling were peppered with blaster bolts, throwing chips of hot duracrete and smoke into the air. A few shots met their mark, however. One shot caught a clone in her throat, another hit a clone's stomach, and a third impacted a barely covered chest. Each instantly dispelled in a cloud of smoke, as did any clone immediately behind them as the lethal bolts of red plasma carried through the clones' bodies. It was too little too late for the Rodian, however. Before he could fire any more shots, the charging mob reached him. He swung his blaster wildly, trying to defend himself, but it did little good. He managed to dispel one more clone with a hit to her jaw before the others overwhelmed him. One knocked the blaster out of his hands, while another 2 went to work pummeling him into unconsciousness. The last thing he saw before his body and mind shut down for repairs was a pair of beautiful, grinning, blue-eyed, blonde faces looming over him with fists cocked back. Okay, that's enough, Naruto said, wincing at the sight of one of his clones stomping on the Rodian's groin. We need to keep moving and draw the guards towards us. He turned towards the rest of his transformed clones. Once he had their attention, he began issuing his directions. Split into 3 groups, he said. Group 1, go down the right hallway. Beat up a few guards, then get the rest to chase you back the way you came. Group 2, same with the left hallway. Group 3, with me. We're going back up the stairs and drawing everyone to us there. Groups 1 and 2, once you get them to chase you, lead them up the stairs to me. Got it? Yes boss, over a dozen voices cried out. At Naruto's gesture, they ran off to follow his commands. Naruto himself, meanwhile, led his group of 5 clones up the stairs to the main levels. As he passed people, he would fire a stun bolt at them, or one of the distractingly sexy clones would snap out a quick blow. By the time he reached what looked like the main living quarters, he had 10 thugs following him, screaming and shooting. When he burst into the large, barracks-like space, he immediately saw over a dozen beings in front of him. There was a moment of complete silence and stillness, like the pause between lightning and thunder. Most of the slavers were stunned at the sight of a group of beautiful women in abbreviated clothing barging into their lives so suddenly. Naruto spotted several sudden nosebleeds, and many of the criminals adopted the brief, glazed expressions of men engaged in mental filmmaking. Despite the somewhat comedic display in front of him, Naruto could feel the beginnings of nervousness flickering within him. His bad arm was already beginning to throb just from the earlier exertion. He could feel his wrist and fingers stiffening as they began to swell. There were a lot of enemies, all heavily armed, and he was much further from 100% than he had let on to Ahsoka. Add on to that how frighteningly effective blasters had proven to be against his clones, and he didn't exactly love his odds at the moment. Nevertheless, he was Naruto fucking Uzumaki. He didn't know the meaning of fear. In every important fight in his life he had been coming from underneath, and this was no different. It would just make it even more awesome when he beat all these idiots and made his daring escape. Those thoughts in mind, Naruto decided it was high time to announce his presence. There was no use looking cool if no one knew who you were after all. "Alright you scum suckers," he yelled, "I'm Naruto Uzumaki. Who wants the first ass-kicking?" That broke the moment of silence like a hammer through glass. The slavers shook themselves out of their pornographic contemplations and began reaching for their weapons, laughing at the absurdity of their situation. Naruto grinned beneath his mask as he saw this. "This is going to be so much fun," he said. "For me, at least." Ahsoka and the former prisoners waited anxiously as they counted down the seconds until the 3 minutes were up. They could hear the distant sounds of fighting, seemingly moving further away. As soon as the time was up, Ahsoka poked her head out into the hall. Seeing no one, she sighed with relief. It seemed Naruto's harebrained scheme was working. She didn't really want to know how Naruto had managed to distract the guards, but whatever he had done had clearly been effective. "It's clear," she called to the rest of the women. "Come on. I'll lead the way. Hurry." Following her lead, the group of women moved quickly down the hall, looking around in apprehension. Ahsoka led them back the way she and Naruto had come, towards the entrance to the landing platform. For the first few turns, nothing went wrong. Their good fortune did not last, however. As she rounded a corner into another hallway, Ahsoka saw 4 armed slavers in front of her. More importantly, they saw her, and the women behind her. Comprehension dawned in their eyes, and one of them made for a comm panel on the wall, no doubt intending to call for reinforcements. Reacting fast, Ahsoka drew her borrowed blaster and fired 3 shots at the man trying to alert the others. The first 2 missed, splashing harmlessly against the far wall, but the last one struck him square in the face. His body seized as the stun bolt overloaded his nervous system. Losing motor control instantly, his momentum carried him face first into the wall. Judging by the painful-sounding crunch, his nose had come off the worst in the collision. "Criff, she got torn. Kill the bitch." Turning her attention to the other 3 goons in front of her, Ahsoka saw they were drawing their own blasters, clearly meaning to kill her, and probably the others as well. Her training kicked in, and instinct took over. She charged forward, firing stun bolts at her attackers. Most went wide, though one caught the leftmost thug in the foot, dropping him to his knees. He wasn't quite unconscious, but he certainly wasn't moving very fast. The other bolts, though they missed, still served a purpose. They forced the remaining slavers to flinch, throwing off their aim. Their own shots failed to impact the small Togruta girl, and she closed the distance rapidly, making accurate aiming almost impossible. Ahsoka took advantage of the one thug's position on his knees, and jumped into the air. She planted a foot into his face, and felt his teeth and nose break under it. Pushing off, she used him as a brace and rebounded towards the center thug. Her rebound spin kick knocked the blaster out of his hands. The head of the thug whose face she had jumped off of crashed against a table, knocking him out cold. Landing in a crouch, Ahsoka lashed out with a vicious back kick. It connected right with the disarmed slaver's groin with enough force to lift him to his toes. His face turned purple, and a strangled squeal escaped his clenched lips. He folded nearly in half before falling to his knees, clutching his battered crotch. Jumping into the air again, Ahsoka was just in time to dodge a flurry of blaster shots from the last thug. She backflipped through the air, using the force to guide her arc. She had always been especially talented at such acrobatics, and the additional training she had taken up since Naruto had arrived had only improved her skills. Those skills were readily apparent now, as her backflip carried her directly onto the shoulders of her final opponent. Gripping on tightly with her knees, she rode on his shoulders as he stumbled at the sudden weight. She raised her blaster into the air and brought it down onto the crown of his head. Once, twice, 3 times she bashed him as hard as she could, dodging his wild arm flailing. Blood flowed from the wound on his head, staining the butt of her blaster. On the 4th blow, his brain apparently had had enough, and he slumped to the ground, moaning softly as unconsciousness claimed him. Rolling back to her feet, Ahsoka faced the thug she had kicked in the balls earlier. He was just regaining his feet, but his back was to her. Smirking, she raised her blaster and aimed at his exposed back and pulled the trigger. The blue stun bolt caught him right between the shoulder blades, dropping him back onto his face for the 2nd time in a minute. "Wow," she heard from behind her. Turning, Ahsoka saw a group of very shocked former slaves. They were looking at her in something resembling awe. Aika in particular had an expression of pure hero worship on her face. Clearly, none of them had been expecting her to be able to defend them quite so spectacularly. "You're amazing, Ahsoka!" Aika cried. "How'd you do that?" "A lot of training," Ahsoka answered with a grin, still riding the thrill of victory. "Now come on. We need to get to those speeders before Naruto. There are still guards at the main door," one of the women said. Ahsoka glanced at the pile of unconscious slavers moaning on the floor behind her. "I think I can handle them," she said, her smile turning cocky. "Let's go." Once more reassured by her confidence, the group of former slaves followed after her as she led them to the exit. With a little more care on Ahsoka's part, they were able to avoid any more encounters with the slavers on the way to the door. From the sounds of blaster fire and screaming coming from above them, Ahsoka figured that Naruto had managed to successfully engage the majority of the gang. She could only hope that the ongoing sounds of battle meant he was still okay and had not been captured or... No, she thought to herself, shaking her head. "I won't even think that. He'll be fine." She slowed the group down as they reached the door that led to the landing platform. Motioning for them to stop, she had them take cover on either side of the door. "I'm going to take those guards down," she said. "You guys wait here. I'll signal you when I'm done." There was a soft chorus of assent to her words, so she turned towards the door. Closing her eyes, she gripped her blaster tightly and took a calming breath. It was a lot different, going through a door knowing that she was going to face enemies on the other side. Still, she had come this far, and she wasn't about to back down now. Her resolve hardened, she opened the door and rolled through it. Between her force senses and her nascent echolocation, she was able to determine where the 2 guards were with a fair degree of precision. Arresting her momentum, she turned and faced the guards as quickly as she could. Her blaster was already rising as she turned, and she fired twice in quick succession. The first shot missed, but the second was true. The guard she had aimed at, the same bearded human from before, pitched backwards, spasms racking his body as his nervous system was overloaded by the stun bolt. That just left the Rodian, the same one she had knocked out earlier. Judging by his snarl of recognition, he had not forgotten this. He raised his blaster, aiming at her head. "You," he screamed, firing indiscriminately. "I'll kill you this time, you little whore." With her already quick reflexes further enhanced by her fledgling force senses, Ahsoka was able to dodge his poorly aimed shots. Some came a little too close for comfort, with one nearly catching her in the face. She could feel the heat of the bolt as it flew in front of her eyes, leaving brief red streaks in her vision. This brief moment of blindness nearly cost her everything. The force warned her of an incoming shot, but she couldn't focus well enough to dodge properly. Before the Rodian could shoot her though, she heard a howling sound, like some demon shrieking in fury. Through the tears and spots obscuring her vision, she could just make out a black blur flying through the air and latching onto her would-be killer's face. As she blinked her vision clear, she could make out why it was. Tora. The Lothcat kept up his attack on the thug, doing his best to claw his eyes out. It took the Rodian several seconds to pry the spitting bundle of claws and teeth off of his face. Unfortunately for him, this was all the time Ahsoka needed to get her vision back. Despite her close call, Ahsoka managed to rally. She closed the gap between her and the Rodian quickly, getting inside his guard. She landed a couple of quick jabs to his stomach before he threw a wild haymaker at her head. She ducked beneath his blow and rolled between his legs, ending up behind him. He had put too much power into his haymaker, and when it didn't connect, the Rodian lost his balance and stumbled forward. Ahsoka capitalized on this by springing off the wall and clubbing him in the back of the head with the butt of her blaster. With the added force of her entire body weight, as well as the speed of her jump, the blow served to once again send the Rodian into painful unconsciousness. Just to be sure, Ahsoka followed it up with a stun bolt to his kidneys, guaranteeing that he wouldn't awaken for at least 20 minutes. Both her opponents down, Ahsoka paused to catch her breath. Her heart was hammering in her chest and her hands were shaking. That near miss with the blaster bolt had shaken her a little, and she needed a few seconds to collect herself. She ran through a basic Jedi breathing technique that Master Liam had taught her, one meant to calm the mind and body. After a few repetitions, it worked. Her hands steadied, and her heartbeat returned to a more normal level. From behind her she heard a familiar purring sound. Turning around, she was pleased to see Torres sitting calmly as if utterly untroubled by anything. His calm, almost placid demeanor was belied by the flecks of blood on this paw. "Hey there, boy," she said, giving him a pat on the head. "You're a lifesaver. You followed my directions really well. Let's get you out of here." Once she had finished greeting the Lothcat, Ahsoka opened the door. The freed women poured out quickly, eager to escape the sight of their imprisonment. She received several grateful looks from the escapees, and one very enthusiastic hug from Aika. Thank you, thank you," the girl said breathlessly. "We're free." "Not quite yet," Ahsoka replied, scooting the excited Thilin towards the parked speeders. "We still have to steal those speeders and wait for Naruto. He should be here any oh no." Ahsoka broke off when she saw a large cargo speeder pull up on the landing platform. It was painted with a symbol she recognized from her classes at the temple. A solid black circle, surrounded by a spiked wheel, broken at the top. The symbol of one of the oldest and most powerful criminal organizations in the galaxy. Black Sun. This far down in the Undercity, the various criminal tribes displayed their colors proudly. It served to mark territory and ward off ill-considered attacks on their bases and vessels. They were the power down here, and Ahsoka remembered just who the former slaves said was going to buy them. This must have been the transport sent to secure their purchase. This was bad. It got even worse when 8 men jumped out of the open doors of the cargo speeder. They were each armed with a blaster rifle. Most had motley-looking weapons, rough but serviceable. The one in front, though, was armed with a fearsome-looking double-barreled blaster rifle, the iconic weapon of a Black Sun foot soldier. "Take cover!" Ahsoka shouted. "Behind those crates." "Hurry!" She pointed at a stack of crates and barrels off to their left. She had no idea what was in them, but they would at least provide better cover than the open air of the landing platform. The women heard her shout and, thankfully, moved fast. They sprinted for the crates as quickly as they could, Ahsoka right in front of them. Tora streaked ahead of them all, becoming nothing but a black blur. Most of them made it before the Black Sun mercenaries could open fire. One of them, the human teenager who had questioned Naruto earlier, wasn't quite so lucky. Her captivity had done her endurance no favors, and the recent sprint out of the cells had left her winded and slow. She was still several meters from the crates when the new arrivals began shooting. The tired girl caught one bolt to the upper thigh and fell to the ground, crying out in pain. Her cries caught Ahsoka's attention, and she reached desperately for the force. Ahsoka stretched her hands out and focused with all her might, determined not to let one of the people Naruto had trusted her to guard die. The girl, much to her shock, found herself being pulled across the ground and behind the crates, safe from the blaster fire. Ahsoka sagged with a mix of exhaustion and relief when she saw that she had been successful. Her relief was short-lived, however, as the Black Sun thugs turned their fire on the crates, sending sparks and bits of hot metal shooting over the heads of those huddled behind them. They were pinned down, and Ahsoka couldn't see any way out of their predicament. There was nowhere to go. Chapter 12. Naruto had been wrong. This was not nearly as much fun as he supposed it would be. In fact, it was probably safe to say that it was not fun at all. He had underestimated just how many thugs were in the building, or more accurately, he had not even thought to try and estimate their numbers. It turned out to be nearly 30, all armed and currently trying to kill him. He was dodging blaster fire like mad, ducking, weaving, and jumping around the room. This was made all the more difficult by the fact that his arm was still fragile and sore. He didn't want to risk breaking it again, and so was forced to limit its use to making hand signs. Even that was becoming harder though, as his wrist and fingers swelled from the injury. It was all he could do just to stay ahead of the constant barrage of blaster bolts whizzing through the air. He wasn't even able to do that perfectly. He winced as a searing red bolt just barely glanced across his ribs, leaving a nasty burn. The injury wasn't serious, and in his adrenaline-fueled rush he barely felt it, but it remained a stark reminder of the consequences for even the slightest mistake. Flipping over an incoming volley, he created 15 clones to harass the gangsters shooting at him. They didn't last very long though. The blistering hail of crossfire tore the group of clones apart in only seconds, some bolts taking out 2, or even 3 clones at once. That was one discovery Naruto wished he had made prior to this fight. It turned out that more powerful blasters, such as heavy blaster pistols and carbines, could produce strong enough bolts that they went right through multiple clones before dissipating. This meant his clones, with their slower reflexes and lack of force senses, could not last long against sustained blaster fire in a confined space like this. The clones did serve to take some of the pressure off of him though. Naruto capitalized on this by jumping off a wall and closing in with the nearest thugs. He was thankful now for Jiraiya's insistence on training his taijutsu so extensively. The extra practice, combined with his training in Terrace under Master Eileen Zan, had served him in good stead here. As he struck out at the closest thug, he briefly wished he had a lightsaber, so he could try out some of the moves he had learned from Master Yoda. Being able to deflect fire away from himself would come in handy right about now. Refocusing on the fight, Naruto landed a vertical side kick to his opponent's jaw, sending a spray of blood and broken teeth flying out of his mouth. He then aimed a low sweeping kick at the man behind him, knocking him to the floor. He had no time for anything else, however, as he then had to dodge out of the way of another storm of blaster bolts. He heard a pained scream from behind him, followed by the smell of burning flesh. He winced at that, and growled angrily. One of the thugs he had just downed must have been hit by the incoming fire of his comrades. Judging by the way his scream had been suddenly cut off, he was probably dead. Naruto felt a pang of guilt and rage. Guilt because he was, at least partially, responsible for the man being killed. His rage was directed at the bastards who had shot their own comrade so recklessly. This was hardly the first time either. Of the 10 or so slavers now lying on the ground, 6 were victims of friendly fire. In a way it was fortuitous that his opponents were so careless, as it certainly made staying alive easier. Nevertheless, Naruto still found it sickening that anyone could so callously disregard the life of a comrade. "You sick bastards!" he shouted as he kept dodging. "First you enslave all those people, now you just murder your friends. I'm gonna beat the shit out of all of you." He didn't have time to dwell further on his outrage, however. It took all of his focus and all of his speed to keep from being riddled by blaster fire himself. Thus, it was something of a minor miracle that he wasn't shot to pieces after what happened next. In the middle of vaulting over a table, Naruto's force senses were suddenly flooded by a feeling of danger. Though his danger senses were the most attuned of his force powers so far, he had still never felt anything like this before. It was like the force was screaming in his ear, desperate to tell him something was wrong. What made it even worse was that it wasn't himself the sense of danger was focused on. It was Ahsoka. She was in trouble. He could see it in his mind. Images of his best friend lying on the ground, bloody, unmoving, dead. No. No. That would not happen. He wouldn't let it happen. His momentary distraction caused him to flub his landing, turning it into a clumsy barrel roll. His mind racing, Naruto continued the roll until it brought him behind an upturned table. Temporarily covered, he glanced around for his options. He had to get to Ahsoka, and quickly. The way back down the stairs was not an option. A dozen armed thugs were blocking the hallway. That only left more unconventional routes. That was fine. He hated being normal anyways. His gaze landed on the nearest window. It was facing the landing platform, and there were no gangsters between it and him. Sure, he was 3 floors up, but it would have to do. His decision made, he sprang into action. There was a blaster lying near his foot, dropped by one of the thugs he had knocked out. He had not been picking them up because they were all set to kill, and he didn't have time to figure out how to change them to stun. Besides, as injured as he was, he needed both arms free to maintain mobility. Now, however, it was exactly what he needed. Naruto snatched the blaster off the floor and began sprinting towards the window. As he got near it, he leveled the blaster and fired at the transparisteel pane. The first 2 shots went straight through, and the third shattered the pane, leaving an open window. Without slowing down, Naruto dived through the newly created exit, his eyes already searching for Ahsoka and the prisoners she had with her. He didn't even notice as another shot grazed the top of his left shoulder, such was the totality of his focus. He spotted her in midair, off to his right. She looked to be pinned behind some crates by a group of newcomers, all of whom were shooting at her. He landed in a crouch, before running towards where he had spotted her, trying to think of any options. His blaster was useless at this range, and he would never survive getting close enough to aim it properly. All of his useful jutsu were either short range or too slow. He could see the crates rapidly being shredded by the storm of blaster fire. He felt a flare of heat from the seal on his stomach, the fox stirring at the feel of his distress. Naruto ignored its whispers, however, refusing to contemplate its offers of power. He knew where that path could lead, and it wasn't a risk he wanted to take. He wasn't that desperate. Not yet. He would find another way. As he grew increasingly desperate for a solution, something in him seemed to click. He focused on his desire to protect his friend and keep his promise to the freed slaves, letting all other thoughts drain from his mind. He felt the force flow through him as it only had during meditation, only he wasn't meditating now. Dropping the blaster, he reached out with both hands and pictured what he wanted, what he needed to happen. Then, focusing with all his might on his goal, he pulled. The metal paneling that made up the deck of the landing platform shuddered briefly against the bolts holding it down. Then, with a tortured shriek, it ripped free from the floor and curled upwards. In the blink of an eye, several dozen square meters of metal floor plating formed into a semicircular wall between the Black Sun mercenaries and the trapped group of escaped slaves. Naruto shook with the effort involved in making his impromptu barrier. Bending nearly 5 tons of durasteel deck plating was no easy feat, especially not for someone so unused to using the force in that way. Still, he was nothing if not determined, and so he reached deep and kept on pulling. The duracrete beneath the metal plating began to crack before ripping out of the ground in chunks, reinforcing the wall. Naruto was too focused on his goal to notice that the barrier was already plenty strong. The only thing going through his mind was to keep everyone safe. His single-minded focus was broken somewhat by a blaster bolt passing close enough to his head to singe his hair. Gasping from exertion, Naruto forced himself to split his focus and look at the group of thugs whose field of fire he had cut off. They were now shooting at him, yelling something about Jedi. Before he could consider moving, he saw a bright green streak cross between him and his attackers. His vision blurred from exhaustion, he could only make out an indistinct black-robed figure wielding a green lightsaber. It seemed they were saved sometime earlier. "How are you so completely sure they're alive?" Luminara asked Jiraiya. "I don't mean to sound callous, but a speeder crash could very likely have killed them." "I know that," Jiraiya said, a note of irritation entering his voice for the first time. "But trust me, if Naruto had died, we would both be very aware of it. The Kyuubi would be freed, and every Jedi in the galaxy would feel that." "I'm not giving up." "I didn't mean to suggest we give up our search," Luminara replied, aware of how she might have come across. "We will, of course, keep looking until we find them, and I dearly hope we find them alive and well. I merely wish for you to be prepared for a different outcome." Jiraiya didn't respond to this. He wasn't about to explain exactly how he knew Naruto was alive. He just knew. He suspected it was a feeling from the Force, but he couldn't say for sure. His skills with using the Force as the Jedi did were better developed than Naruto's, but still very new. He was decent at detecting a being's location, but gaining insight into the present or the future was still a shaky proposition at best for him. Stretching out with his still developing senses, he tried again to get a fix on his godson's location. Over the last few hours, ever since the comlink had gone silent, in fact, Jiraiya had periodically tried to locate Naruto with the Force. There were far too many people around for a tracker toad, so he was forced to use his new skills. So far, he had not had much success, gaining only a general feeling that Naruto was indeed alive and they were getting closer. Now, however, they had just entered level 235, the same level Ahsoka had said they were on right before they crashed. He hoped the proximity would allow him to finally locate Naruto and his friend. His hopes were justified when, after just a few seconds of searching, he felt two bright presences that could only be Naruto and Ahsoka. What's more, they were close. "I feel them," Jiraiya said, smiling widely. "They're to our left, maybe a dozen kilometers." Luminara reached out with her own senses to try and get a better idea of their location. "Yes, I feel them as well," she said, unable to completely hide the relief in her voice. The last thing she had wanted was to find the children dead. "We should be there in a few minutes." Sure enough, just 10 minutes later, their speeder rounded a corner and came into view of what Jiraiya could only assume was Naruto and Ahsoka's location. It wasn't a difficult deduction, if he was being honest. The full-fledged battle going on was a fairly good indication that Naruto was down there, and that he had been allowed to make decisions. "Hold on," Luminara warned him before pushing the engines to their limit. She could sense several people trapped behind a pile of old crates, pinned by blaster fire. She would have to move quickly to help them. Before she was in range to do anything though, her eyes were drawn to movement from the third floor of a nearby building. As she watched, one of the windows shattered under a volley of blaster fire. Not half a second later, a small figure dove out of the window, executed a near-perfect front tuck, and landed in a crouch on the ground, seemingly unharmed. Judging by his blonde hair and the green vest he wore over his Jedi tunic, this was Naruto Uzumaki. She was rather impressed by his exit from the building, but that turned to apprehension when he began sprinting directly towards the ongoing firefight. A jolt of worry and irritation came off of Jiraiya as he saw the same thing. "What the hell is he doing?" he asked rhetorically, his hands squeezing his kneecaps. "He's going to get himself killed." Luminara silently agreed with his assessment. She was about to try and do something desperate, such as try to jump onto the platform from their position nearly 400 meters away, when she saw Naruto stop running. Then, before she could even finish wondering what he was doing now, the force seemed to explode with power. It was as if someone had ignited a small star in the force, such was the power that she felt. It was so overwhelming that it took her a moment to realize that it was coming from the boy. As she watched, nearly 50 square meters of metal floor plating ripped free of its bolts and curled up to shield the people trapped behind the crates. A second later, the Duracrete pad the plates had been anchored to began to fracture and rise up, forming another layer on top of the improvised wall. His technique was incredibly sloppy and inefficient, Luminara noted in the back of her mind as she piloted them closer. He was wasting nearly all of his energy just stirring up the force around him, but that was to be expected of someone so inexperienced. It made it all the more impressive that he had managed a feat even many Jedi Knights would have been unable to do. The power, however, wasn't what most grabbed her attention. The most remarkable thing about his display of force power was the emotions she could feel mixed into it. There was protectiveness, friendship, a sense of duty, and beyond all of that was a sense of happiness and love. A love of his friends and a joy at protecting them from those who would do them harm. The strength of those emotions was overpowering, and they spoke of a deep and, to her mind, dangerously un-Jedi-like attachment to his friends. Yet they did not taint the feeling of the Force as she had supposed they would. There was no darkness in the flare of Force power, none of the cold sliminess of fear or the corrosive burn of anger. Naruto was clearly acting out of a sense of attachment and strong emotions, yet the Force seemed to glow with the light. She half expected it to be visible to the naked eye. It was warm, comforting, beautiful even. All of these thoughts passed through her head in less than 3 seconds as she flew the speeder closer to the firefight at top speed, while also planning her actions upon arrival. An advantage of her Jedi mental discipline. As soon as she was within 20 meters of the platform, she set the speeder to hover and leapt out without a word. Jiraiya, she figured, was a trained and experienced warrior even more skilled than herself. He would make himself useful, of that, she was sure. Meanwhile, the shooters, Black Sun mercenaries she could see now, had shifted their aim to Naruto and begun trying to kill him. It seemed they had deduced he was the cause of the landscape rearranging itself. She needed to give them a different target, one that could fight back. So, she leapt right in front of them, her emerald lightsaber igniting in midair and batting away several bolts. Criffing hells! It's another Jedi. Kill her, she heard one of them yell. He wielded the double-barreled blaster of an actual Black Sun foot soldier, not merely a hired mercenary. He was the leader. Clearly, negotiating was not going to be an option here, though Luminara was determined to take at least the leader alive. He was attempting to murder 2 Jedi younglings, and that was something she was very interested in discussing with him. At length. That in mind, she marched steadily forward, her lightsaber moving constantly. Luminara was a practitioner of Form 3, Sorisu, and its focus on flawless defense served her well here. Every bolt that came near her was effortlessly redirected, often straight back at the one who had shot it in the first place. Any she did not block with her lightsaber she dodged, displaying remarkable flexibility and agility as she contorted herself around a particularly vicious hail of fire. Advancing thusly, she soon stood within melee range of the mercenaries, the 5 who were still alive anyways. The other 3 had been killed by their own reflected blaster bolts, and now lay on the ground, smoking holes where their faces had once been. The first thug lost his blaster rifle, and one of the arms holding it, as she swiped her saber upwards through the weapon in one smooth stroke. Her downward return strike took the next one across the chest. He died with a wordless scream, a neatly cauterized gash nearly bisecting his torso. She blocked a few bolts from the third thug as she rushed over towards him. Using the force to enhance her speed, she caught him with a spinning heel kick to the temple. The force of the blow somersaulted him nearly 180 degrees, planting his face into the floor. Continuing the momentum from the kick, she swung her saber horizontally, batting away a shot meant to take her in the back. A quick force push served to slam the 4th shooter into the side of the cargo speeder they had arrived in. She heard the dull thunk of his head hitting the metal hull, and he slid to the floor, already unconscious. That left only the leader. Her attack had been so swift that he was only now recovering his wits and bringing his distinctive weapon around to bear on her. It was a powerful blaster, Luminara knew, but also heavy and somewhat slow to move. As such, by the time the foot soldier had readied his weapon, Luminara was already less than a meter away. She cut his rifle in half with a twitch of her blade, angling it close enough to his hands to force him to drop what remained of his weapon lest he burn his fingers on the newly molten metal. "This is over," she said calmly, leveling her lightsaber at his throat. "Surrender, and no further harm shall come to you or your men." Her voice was level, but hard and unyielding as durasteel. She took a very dim view of such scum as this man and his cronies. The Black Sun member glanced quickly at what was left of his men. It was not an encouraging sight. 4 were dead, 2 out cold, and 1 was moaning on the ground clutching the stump of his left arm. Looking back at the Jedi Master, he snarled a bit, and then sighed, his shoulders slumping. "Fine then, Jedi," he said. "I surrender." A mere second after Luminara had jumped out of the speeder, Jiraiya had followed suit, though his target was different. As Luminara had chosen to directly engage the men threatening his godson, Jiraiya decided to check on Naruto himself. A single leap carried him onto what was left of the landing platform, and he moved swiftly to where Naruto stood, his arms still extended towards the wall he had made. Jiraiya grew worried when he saw Naruto swaying on his feet, blood soaking through his mask from a heavy nosebleed. Several nasty-looking burns marked his arms and torso, no doubt near misses from blaster fire. "Naruto," he yelled out, recognizing the signs of strain and exhaustion. "Relax. Let it drop, they're safe now." Naruto blinked dumbly for a second before the message finally seemed to sink in. With one last heaving breath, he dropped his arms, releasing his hold on the force. The wall of duracrete and metal plating he had created instantly collapsed. The duracrete crumbled to the ground, while the deck plating partially relaxed, the constant tension on it now gone. With his focus no longer on maintaining his grip on the wall, Naruto could now feel the strain such a technique had placed on him. He collapsed backwards, only to feel Jiraiya catch him before he hit the ground. Looking up at his godfather, Naruto gave him a shaky eye smile. "Hey Jiraiya-sensei," he said between gulps of air. "Are Ahsoka and the others safe?" "They're fine," Jiraiya said, relieved to hear Naruto's voice. "Master Unduli is taking care of them. Just rest for now." Naruto nodded weakly before his eyes shot wide open. "There are more in the building," he said urgently. "At least 20. They're probably on their way." Jiraiya cursed at that, before forming a single Kage Bushin. "Watch him," he told his clone, pointing at Naruto. He passed the exhausted blonde off to the clone and turned to face the building Naruto had indicated. His keen ears could just barely pick up the sounds of running and shouting from inside. With a sigh, he cracked his neck and went to work. He formed a large Rasengan in one hand and jumped towards where he heard most of the noise coming from. His other hand held a flash bomb. Thrusting the Rasengan forward, he let his control of the technique go at just the right moment. The resulting detonation blasted a hole straight through the wall and into the room beyond. He threw the flash bomb in before his feet had even touched the floor and closed his eyes. Foomp! With a muffled whoosh, the bomb detonated, flooding the room with the light of a half a dozen suns. The unprepared thugs, already caught off guard by Jiraiya's sudden entrance, had no time to brace themselves. They went down on their knees, screaming and rubbing their eyes. Jiraiya wasted no time in knocking them out with a single swift blow each. He could hear more of them rushing down the stairs behind him. Turning to face them, he began flicking through hand signs, his fingers a blur. Just as the first thug came into view, he slammed his hand into the wall. "Kochios, Gamaguchi Shirbari," he yelled. In an instant, the walls, floor, and ceiling of the stairwell transformed into a fleshy, soft-looking, pink substance. Much to the surprise and distress of the gangsters, it began to rapidly engulf their limbs, trapping them in place. Within a handful of seconds, all of the men on the stairs were absorbed into the esophagus of the giant fire toad of Mnemayaboku, becoming its next meal. With a wave of his hand, Jiraiya dismissed the summon, reverting the stairway back to its original form. He listened carefully, but couldn't hear any more people in the building. His task done, he turned back to the pile of thugs he had knocked out earlier. Using a spool of ninja wire, he restrained their limbs and removed all of their weapons. Just to be on the safe side, he slapped a restraint seal on all of them. Until it was removed, they would be unable to move or even wake up. They wouldn't be escaping anytime soon. "You all just hang out here," he said to the groaning thugs. "I'm sure someone will be along shortly to show you to a nice jail cell." Satisfied that the thugs were sufficiently dealt with, Jiraiya jumped right back out of the hole he had come through. As he landed, he noticed that Luminara had moved over to the group of women huddled behind the crates. She seemed to be talking to Ahsoka, who was eagerly peeking around her. Taking Naruto from his clone, he carried his godson over to the group. As soon as she saw him, Ahsoka pushed past Luminara to run up to her friend. "Naruto. Is he all right? What's wrong with him?" she asked, clearly anxious. Her voice was tight with the stress of the past day. She looked over Naruto worriedly, searching for any injury to explain his state. Only Jiraiya's hand on her shoulder kept her from crowding him to see what was wrong. "I'm fine," Naruto tried to reassure her, though his weak voice betrayed him. Ahsoka just shot him a somewhat watery glare. "Shut up," she yelled. "Why you went and got yourself hurt again, dummy? I told you not to get hurt anymore, and you went and..." Ahsoka ended her rant with a sniff as she discreetly wiped tears out of her eyes. Her yelling had attracted the attention of Master Luminara, however. Noticing the state the masked blonde was in, she moved over to check on him. She placed a hand on his forehead and closed her eyes, reaching out with the force. While she was not a true healer, she had made a decent study of the fundamentals, specifically for situations like this one. What she found while probing his body was not surprising, considering what he had just done. "He's exhausted and badly drained, but he should be fine," she said to both Ahsoka and Jiraiya. "He was very inefficient with the way he used the Force, and that placed considerable strain on his body and mind. He needs rest, and food after that. Those burns will need Bacta dressings, but they aren't life-threatening." Jiraiya sighed with relief at hearing her diagnosis. He had suspected as much, having recognized some of the symptoms from seeing cases of chakra exhaustion, but he had wanted to be sure. He would have to be sure Naruto understood his limits better in the future. He set Naruto down, propping him up on one of the crates while Luminara began to apply Bacta-infused bandages to Naruto's wounds. He visibly relaxed as the analgesic properties of the Bacta soothed his pain. As soon as she was done, Ahsoka and some large black feline creature walked over to the boy. Seeing Tora approaching, Naruto's eyes widened a little and he tried to scoot away. His limbs refused to obey his commands, however, and he was stuck waiting for the inevitable mauling. Much to his surprise though, it never came. Instead, Tora nuzzled into his side gently, purring like a motor. He used his head to lift one of Naruto's arms, and then curled up under it, pressed against the warmth of Naruto's body. "Heh, what do you know, he likes me now," Naruto said, smiling at the newly docile loafcat before looking up at Ahsoka. Her expression was fluctuating between worry, amusement, and irritation, before eventually settling into a faux smirk of cockiness. "You know I had everything under control, right?" she said, gesturing to the now calm battlefield. "You didn't need to go and rip up half the platform." "Really?" he replied, feigning offense. "Because it looked to me like you were about 2 seconds from getting shot to bits." They glared at each other for a few seconds, each pretending to be irritated. After a bit, though, neither could keep up the act. Ahsoka cracked first, giggling and grinning, followed shortly by Naruto. For nearly a minute, the sound of their laughter echoed around the otherwise grim neighborhood. As it faded, however, Ahsoka's face grew serious and she grabbed his right hand in hers. "Thank you for saving me, Naruto," she said sincerely, squeezing his hand gently. "But I don't want you hurting yourself just to help me, okay? I don't like seeing you like this. I thought you were gonna die." "You're my friend, Ahsoka," Naruto replied, his own voice just as serious. "I will always do whatever I can to help my friends. No matter if I get hurt or not. That's a promise, and I never break my promises." Ahsoka blinked at that, and opened her mouth as if to respond. She closed it though, seemingly thinking about what he had just said. Uncertainty flickered across her face for a brief moment, followed by determination. Finally, she broke into a broad grin and poked him in the chest. "Well then," she said cheekily, "I guess I'll just have to get strong enough that I won't need protection, won't I?" "In that case, I'll race you to becoming a master," Naruto said, unable to resist making it a competition. "Oh, you are so on," Ahsoka responded, a teasing light in her eyes. "I bet I'll be on the council before you're even a knight. You do know I'm older than you, right?" "Yeah, but I've been training since I was just a little kid." "So have I." "Sure, as a shinobi. We're talking about being a Jedi Master here, remember? Or is your brain still fried?" And so it went, their good-natured teasing going back and forth. From a little way away, Luminara watched and listened to their friendly banter, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully. To her mind, the two of them, especially Naruto, were far too attached to one another, skirting the bounds of the Jedi Code. However, she could not help but recall the feelings inherent in Naruto's use of the Force. All of that affection, that attachment, that overwhelming love for his friends and comrades, it had colored his Force presence like ink in water, but it had not darkened it. Instead, it had fueled one of the strongest surges of the light side she had seen in her life. Frowning briefly, she turned her attention back to the slaves the two younglings had freed. Whether Naruto's penchant for attachment was good or bad was for the council to deal with. For now, she was content to acknowledge that he and Ahsoka had done a very good deed, freeing these women. She had already contacted the council to send some backup to help deal with both the women and the prisoners. For now, all she could do was wait and give first aid. As she waited, though, the memory of Naruto's emotion-fueled light kept circling around her mind. As did the memories of what she and Jiraiya had discussed earlier that day. In the end, it took nearly 3 hours for the council's backup to arrive. While Luminara had sent the details of their location and the route she had used to get there, it didn't change the fact that it was a labyrinthine mess of tunnels and streets that laid between the temple and her present position. The fact that the backup was bringing several larger shuttle speeders did not help their speed either. By the time it got to them, Naruto had finally fallen asleep, his body shutting down to recover from the strain he had placed upon it. Eventually, though, it did arrive. Much to Ahsoka's delight, the convoy was headed by Master Plo-kun. He was the logical choice, being the most familiar with Coruscant's underworld of any of the masters currently at the temple. Not that Ahsoka knew any of that. She was just happy to see her first friend and surrogate uncle figure amongst the Jedi again. "Kotoya, Master Plo," she chirped happily, waving at him. He waved back, grateful to see his young friend alive and unharmed. The news of her ending up all the way on level 1 had worried him greatly. "Kotoya, little Sokka," he said. "I am most pleased to see that you and young Naruto are unharmed. Surviving a trip that far into the Undercity is quite impressive. I hear that you two even managed to uncover a slaving ring and free a group of prisoners." Well, that was mostly Naruto, she said, not wanting to take credit she felt she had not earned. Though she would not admit it, she partially blamed herself for getting pinned down, and for Naruto having hurt himself saving them. That's not true, a small voice said from off to one side. Ahsoka was really awesome. She let us out of the cells and beat up a whole bunch of bad guys. It was Wizard. Ahsoka, her montrals darkening slightly from the praise, looked over to see Aika, the young Vilin girl, standing nearby. She had evidently overheard their conversation, and chosen to offer her own opinion on how much credit Ahsoka deserved. Indeed, PLO said, turning to kneel down and face the girl. That sounds like a fascinating tale. I am PLO-kun. What is your name, young one? I'm Aika, she said shyly. Are you a Jedi too? It is good to meet you, Aika. PLO answered. And yes, I am a Jedi. Now, tell me more of how Ahsoka here rescued you from such a terrible place. Aika instantly perked up, her shyness seemingly vanishing as if it were never there. Excited at the chance to tell a cool story, she dove right into the details of their escape from the slavers. PLO-kun listened patiently, nodding and encouraging her from time to time. Ahsoka, meanwhile, was torn between happiness at the praise she was getting and mortification at how exaggerated much of Aika's story was. Even so, she was hardly going to interrupt the girl when she was making her sound so cool. That, she figured, would just be rude. Well, that certainly sounds like quite the adventure, PLO said, before he sobered. So, Aika, tell me. Do you have any family we can contact, to let them know you are safe? He hated asking the question, as he strongly suspected the answer would only bring up painful memories for the girl. There were only so many ways a girl of her age ended up in a slaving ring, and most of them involved either dead parents or parents who deserved death. It was best to get it out of the way now, though, so he could decide on the right course of action as soon as possible. His fears were confirmed when her cheerful smile dropped away, leaving a look of sorrow and, much more worryingly, terror in its place. Please don't send me back there, Mr. Jedi, she said, her voice shaking in sudden fear. I promise I'll be good, just don't make me go back to them. Please, they're so I can't. The young Vilin began to babble incoherently, tears streaming down her face while Ahsoka looked on confused. The idea of returning to her family clearly terrified her, leaving PLO with a sudden urge to hunt down whatever monsters had hurt this little girl so much. He dismissed the notion as unworthy of a Jedi Master, releasing his anger into the Force with some difficulty. Focusing on the distressed child in front of him, PLO grasped her shoulders and gave them a comforting squeeze. Calm yourself, little Aika, he said, sending waves of calm and peace to her through the Force. It worked, and her cries petered off into mere sniffles as her fear receded. No one will make you go back there if you do not want to. I am sorry that this injustice happened to you, child. To all of you. He addressed the last bit to the group of women who had begun to gather near him, clearly eavesdropping on the conversation. He was saddened, but not surprised, to see the looks of fear, distrust, and outright anger and resentment on many of their faces when they saw him. It was becoming a more and more common sight these days. Fat lot of good your apologies do us, Jedi, one of the women, a Rudian Twi'lek, said angrily. Maybe you should have stopped these guys before they took over this neighborhood and started rounding people up. Or is it too far from your ivory tower to come help us down here? Again, all I can offer is my apologies, and the help of the Jedi and the Republic in rebuilding your lives. These men will be punished, and those who hired them will be brought to justice, he said calmly, not letting her anger affect him. It was not wholly unjustified, after all. He noticed Ahsoka paying close attention to the conversation, but made no move to dismiss her. She had already risked her life to help free these women, he figured, so she had a right to hear what they had to say. Don't make me laugh, another woman said, a pink-skinned Mickean this time. Those men are Black Sunday. They'll just bribe whatever judge you put them in front of, if they even make it that far. Their bosses won't even get arrested. As for your help, since when have the Jedi or the Republic ever helped people like us? We're too small to get help from the oh-so-mighty Jedi and their precious Republic. I cannot change the past, however much I might wish to, PLO said. The Jedi failed to prevent this injustice from occurring, but I can assure you that we will do everything in our power to help you now. The sheer conviction in his voice mollified the women's anger somewhat. None of them had been expecting an admission of fault from a Jedi, and hearing such shocked them into a contemplative silence. Taking that as permission to continue, PLO-kun began to speak again. Ladies, I understand your reluctance to trust me. However, you have my word as a member of the Jedi High Council that I will see to it you are given help, and these criminals are given justice. Please, go with Ahsoka to Master Unduli. She will take you to the temple while I escort these slavers to a holding facility. At his gentle urging, the group of women began to make their way over to one of the transport speeders he had brought with him, led once more by Ahsoka. As they got in, Luminara introduced herself and helped them get situated. She also made sure that Naruto, who was still sound asleep, was loaded into the speeder as well. Meanwhile, Jiraiya and PLO began to load the still restrained prisoners into the other speeder. Only when they were secured in stun binders did Jiraiya remove the restraining seals he had placed on them earlier. When he saw the seals, PLO was curious as to what they were and asked Jiraiya about it. When he heard the explanation, his interest piqued even further. I will have to speak to Master Yoda about allowing you to instruct some of the other masters in these strange techniques of yours, he said thoughtfully. If you are willing to share them, that is. I would be willing to teach my techniques to the Jedi Council, Jiraiya said, somewhat surprised by the sudden interest. I don't think many of them will be very popular, though. Most of them are too aggressive to really mesh well with the Order's philosophy on such things. Perhaps, PLO said. But it is my belief that knowledge is rarely, if ever, good or evil. It may be tempting, dangerous even, but in the end, it is up to each of us as individuals to use our skills and powers justly. That's a somewhat different viewpoint from most Jedi I've talked to, Jiraiya said. Most of them aren't as open to new ideas as you are. Yes, I have heard of your disagreements with others on the Jedi Code, PLO said. If you are willing, I would be interested in hearing your opinions on the matter. Really, Jiraiya said, his surprise and skepticism now showing in his voice. You want to hear what I think about the code? Yes, PLO replied evenly. I find that hearing differing viewpoints often leads one to greater wisdom. If you wish to accompany me to the holding facility, we could talk on the way. Jiraiya considered this. On the one hand, he was loath to leave Naruto when the kid was vulnerable like he was now. On the other hand, he trusted both Luminara and Ahsoka to look after him. Honestly, considering he was unconscious, and likely would remain so for nearly 12 hours, he was probably the safest he had been all day. At least now he couldn't go finding more trouble. In the end, the chance to get his ideas heard by a member of the High Council, and a seemingly sympathetic one at that, was too good to pass up. While he respected their mission and agreed with most of their ideals, Jiraiya did have serious issues with the Order's positions on emotion and attachment. Issues that he felt this conversation might be the first step in resolving. If you're willing, I'd be happy to tag along, Master, he said eventually. PLO nodded and turned to board the speeder. Jiraiya signaled Luminara he was going with PLO, and then followed after him. A few seconds later, their pilot pulled away from the platform, and they were off to drop off their prisoners. By the time they were halfway back to the temple, Ahsoka was bored. Naruto was still out, and all of the former slaves had fallen asleep as well. Evidently, they had not had much opportunity for rest prior to their rescue, and the adrenaline-fueled escape had thoroughly worn them all out. While she didn't mind them taking a nap, it did leave Ahsoka with no one to talk to in the passenger bay. No one but Master Unduli, that is. Normally, Ahsoka would be hesitant to bother a master. She wasn't even a Padawan yet, and while they were usually very kind about it, most masters were far too busy to talk to a youngling outside of classes. In this case, however, Ahsoka was perfectly fine with talking to the Mirialan master. She was brimming with questions that she wanted answers to, and she didn't think Master Lean was the person to ask. Besides, it wasn't like Master Unduli was doing anything right now. You know, youngling, if you keep fidgeting like that, you'll likely wear a hole in the seat, Luminara said, causing Ahsoka to let out a startled gasp. Now, what is it that has you so brimming with curiosity, Ahsoka? Ahsoka blinked, shocked at Master Unduli's seeming knowledge of her thoughts. Could she read her mind? Internally, Ahsoka rolled her eyes. She was a Jedi Master, of course, she could read her mind. Only when you project your thoughts so loudly, youngling, Luminara said, startling Ahsoka again. You should practice shielding your mind and controlling your emotions more diligently if you don't wish to be so obvious. Sorry, Master, Ahsoka said, embarrassed at being called out like that. That's quite all right, Ahsoka. Now, ask your questions. What has you so worked up? Well, it's about something I heard some of the slaves say after we freed them, Ahsoka said softly, not wanting to wake any of the sleeping passengers. When they heard that it was Jedi who were helping them, they seemed shocked, I guess. And angry. They talked as though the Jedi Order didn't care about them. The Republic too. They said that the Jedi and the Republic always ignored the little people. What did they mean, Master? Luminara was quiet for several moments, pondering the question. Normally, she wouldn't want to strip a youngling of their illusions at such a young age, but it seemed that circumstances had conspired to give Ahsoka a taste of the uglier side of reality. Trying to shelter her like most younglings were sheltered would just backfire now. Sighing, Luminara decided that the mostly unvarnished truth was her best option. Truthfully, Ahsoka, many people in the galaxy feel abandoned or ignored by both the Republic and the Jedi Order, she said. There are too few Jedi to help everyone who needs it. We must focus our efforts on where we can do the most good, and that often leaves less obvious problems, like this slaving ring, unchecked. But then, why can't the Republic step in and help the people we can't? Ahsoka asked, not understanding the problem. To her mind, it was simple. If there weren't enough Jedi to help everyone, then the Republic government should pick up the slack. That would be ideal, Master Unduli admitted, pleased with the girl's grasp of the system. Or at least, what the system ought to be. But the Senate, and much of the rest of the government, is mired in corruption and bureaucracy. Chancellor Palpatine has done some good in curbing the worst of the corruption, but it is still a crippling issue. It is even affecting the Jedi somewhat. What do you mean? Ahsoka asked. With the government so paralyzed by corruption, the Jedi are often being forced to spend all their time preventing conflict from breaking out between various systems, Luminara answered. The conversation was moving beyond what you would normally consider speaking with a youngling about, but Ahsoka seemed quite precocious, and was apparently following along well. Old feuds often flourish under the nose of corrupt officials. As Jedi, we spend much of our time ensuring these feuds do not erupt into actual war. As such, the Jedi simply do not have the time to ferret out every hidden injustice. As unpleasant as it may sound, sometimes you must accept that there are some injustices that will go unpunished. If you try to fix every wrong in the galaxy, you will end up accomplishing very little. Learn where your efforts can actually bear fruit, and focus them there. I understand that. I really do, but I'm not going to be like that. I don't want to be someone who forgets about people like, well, them, Ahsoka said, gesturing to the crowd of napping women. I'll always help people who I see are in need. Luminara smiled a little at that. The conviction in the young Togruta was something to see, and she could hardly gainsay her goal. Ahsoka was young and idealistic, and Luminara couldn't bring herself to strip her of that just yet. That sounds like a very admirable goal, she said. Now, I suggest you meditate until we reach the temple. You've had a very stressful day, and you need to center yourself. I will let you know when we arrive. But Master Unduli, Ahsoka said, pouting somewhat. She had never been very good at meditation, and she would much rather have continued their conversation. Nevertheless, a pointed look from Luminara told her that it had not really been a suggestion. Bowing her head, she walked back to sit by Naruto as she tried to meditate. As she sat and tried to center herself in the Force, Ahsoka found herself unable to focus on meditating. There was too much going on in her head, and too much adrenaline still pumping through her system. She found herself listening to the ambient noise around her. Tora, who was still laying on Naruto's chest, was purring loudly. It mixed with the soft sound of Naruto's snores and the gentle buzz of the speeder engines. Altogether, they blended into a surprisingly relaxing white noise. Before she was even truly aware of her own growing drowsiness, Ahsoka dozed off into a nap. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfiction. Looking forward to having you on board again.